A 10-year-old boy walks into a roadside diner during a thunderstorm. Three men are watching him from the back table. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. He's bleeding under his hoodie, and he's carrying a note in his backpack that will change everything. Across the counter sits a scarred biker who buried his own daughter 6 years ago. A man who swore he'd never get close to another living soul. But tonight, a child's handwritten words are about to drag him straight back into the fire. What happens next will shatter you. Stay until the very end. This one hits different. Drop a like right now, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The rain came sideways through Black Hollow, Missouri, like it had a personal grudge against every living thing still stupid enough to be outside. Not the kind of rain that washes anything clean. The kind that drives mud into cracks, floods gutters with cigarette butts and motor oil, and turns 2-lane county roads into black rivers reflecting nothing but headlights and misery. It had been falling since Tuesday. 4 straight days. The Gasconade River was swelling past its banks, and the local news had already stopped pretending anyone in the county government was going to do something about it. Black Hollow was the kind of town that got forgotten during disasters. Got forgotten during everything, really. Population just under 3,000. Most of them working jobs that no longer paid enough to justify the commute, drinking at bars that no longer bothered fixing their signs, and dying in hospitals 2 counties over because the local clinic shut down in 2019. The only thing that still worked in Black Hollow with any reliability was Ruby's Junction, a roadside diner wedged between a dead gas station and a gravel lot where long-haul truckers sometimes parked overnight when the weather turned ugly. The building itself looked like it had been losing an argument with gravity for 30 years. Sagging roof, cracked windows taped from the inside, a neon sign that buzzed and flickered the word "open" in a shade of pink that made it look like it was bleeding. Inside, the air smelled like burnt bacon grease, industrial coffee, wet boots, and the particular kind of silence that happens when strangers are all pretending not to notice each other. Tonight, Ruby's was full. Truckers hunched over plates of eggs and toast. A couple of drifters nursing water glasses near the jukebox that hadn't worked since the Obama administration. 2 women in nursing scrubs splitting a slice of cherry pie and talking in whispers about someone named Donna who hadn't shown up for her shift again. And near the back, taking up the largest booth like they owned the air around it, 3 men who didn't belong. They were loud, not drunk loud, confident loud. The kind of volume that tells a room they don't care who's listening because nobody in here can do a damn thing about it. One wore a faded county contractor's jacket, the name patch ripped off. He had thick forearms and a jaw that looked like it had been broken and set wrong at least twice. The second was younger, leaner, with a serpent tattoo crawling up the left side of his neck and disappearing under his ear like it was whispering something only he could hear. He kept spinning a lighter between his fingers, click, click, click. A metronome of casual menace. The third man was the quietest. Clean-shaven, pressed shirt, eyes that moved around the room like a security camera on a slow rotation. He never smiled. Not once. And every few minutes, all 3 of them looked toward the same booth near the emergency exit, where a boy sat alone. His name was Eli Mercer, but nobody in Ruby's Junction knew that. Nobody knew anything about him. He was 10 years old, barely 80 pounds, with dark circles carved under brown eyes that had stopped looking like a child's a long time ago. He wore an oversized gray hoodie pulled tight around his wrists, not because he was cold, because underneath the sleeves his forearms were a geography of bruises, fingerprint-shaped, layered purple over yellow over green, a calendar of pain written in skin. He sat in the booth without ordering. The waitress, a tired woman named Glenda with varicose veins and a pencil behind her ear, had asked him twice if he wanted something. Both times he shook his head without looking up. "Not hungry," he said. Glenda had seen enough scared kids pass through this diner to know what that meant. She left a glass of water on his table anyway and didn't push it. Eli kept his backpack on his lap like it contained everything he had left in the world, because it did. Across the diner, at the far end of the counter where the fluorescent light didn't quite reach, a man sat alone drinking black coffee. Mason Creed, late 40s, 6'2", 220 pounds of scar tissue, bad decisions, and silence. His beard had gone silver at the jaw, and the skin around his eyes was weathered the way only years of highway wind and sleepless nights can weather a face. He wore a black leather cut, heavy, road-beaten, patched with insignia from the Iron Vales Motorcycle Club, a brotherhood that had been riding these Missouri back roads since before Mason was born. His hands were scarred across every knuckle. His left ring finger was missing below the second joint. A faded tattoo on his forearm read a name, Lily, in cursive letters that had blurred with time and sweat and grief until they looked less like ink and more like a wound that never fully closed. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't look at his phone. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, coffee going cold, a slice of pecan pie untouched beside it, staring at nothing with the particular emptiness of a man who had already decided that the world had nothing left to offer him and was just waiting for the feeling to become permanent. Mason had been riding south from Kansas City when the storm caught him outside Waynesville. He pulled off the highway for coffee and shelter. That was the plan. Drink the coffee. Wait for the rain to ease, ride until something stopped him, or nothing did. He had no destination, hadn't had one in 2 years. The Iron Vales gave him a road and a reason to keep the engine running, but the truth was simpler and uglier than any Brotherhood patch could cover. Mason Creed was a man running from a grave he couldn't find. His daughter Lily had been 14 when she disappeared. He'd been inside at the time. 18 months at the state correctional facility in Potosi for aggravated assault. A bar fight that went sideways when a meth dealer put his hands on a waitress and Mason put the dealer's head through a window. By the time he got out, Lily's mother had overdosed, the foster system had swallowed his daughter, and somewhere between a group home in Springfield and a truck stop in Tulsa, Lily had vanished. The FBI found her body 11 months later in a shallow grave outside Amarillo, Texas. 14 years old, trafficked across 3 state lines, buried in a field behind an abandoned cattle ranch where coyotes had already started undoing what was left. Mason never got a trial to sit through, never got a face to hate. The men responsible were arrested in a separate federal sweep, tried in a courtroom he wasn't allowed to enter, and sentenced to numbers that didn't mean anything because no number of years in a cage equals 1 dead child. Since then, Mason existed. That was the most generous word for it. He rode, he drank, he sat in diners like this one and let his coffee go cold because finishing it meant standing up, and standing up meant deciding where to go next, and deciding where to go next meant admitting he was still alive, which most days felt like the cruelest joke the universe had ever told. The Iron Vales kept him breathing, not out of kindness, out of loyalty that ran deeper than kindness. The kind of bond formed between men who had all, in their own way, been broken by the same world that now pretended they didn't exist. But even loyalty has limits when the person you're trying to save doesn't want saving. Mason lifted his coffee cup, and that's when the boy walked past him. It happened fast. Eli slid out of his booth, backpack clutched against his chest, head down, moving toward the restrooms with the careful, practiced invisibility of a child who had learned that being noticed meant being hurt. He passed within 2 feet of Mason's stool, and as he did, a folded piece of paper slipped from his hand. Not dropped, placed, deliberately, precisely, aimed at the floor beside Mason's boot, the way someone leaves a message when they're too terrified to say the words out loud. Mason caught it before it hit the ground. Instinct. Prison reflex. His hand closed around the paper and he looked up just in time to see the boy glance back over his shoulder with eyes so full of desperate, pleading fear that for a half-second Mason forgot where he was. He unfolded the note. Pencil on lined notebook paper, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. Please don't let them take my sister tonight. Mason read it twice. His jaw tightened. The coffee cup didn't move again. Something shifted inside his chest. Not warmth, not hope, nothing that clean. Something more like a crack forming in concrete, something that had been sealed shut for 6 years, splitting open 1 millimeter at a time because a child's handwriting had found the exact frequency that could shatter it. He looked toward the 3 men in the back booth. The one with the serpent tattoo was staring directly at Eli's empty seat. Then his eyes moved to Mason. And Mason saw it, the recognition. Not of him specifically, but of what he was. The leather, the patches, the scars, the posture of a man who knew violence the way a carpenter knows wood. The serpent-tattooed man's lighter stopped clicking. Mason folded the note into his fist. The rain hammered harder against the windows. He waited 3 minutes, counted them on the clock above the kitchen window. Then he stood, left cash on the counter, and walked toward the narrow hallway that led to the restrooms. He moved slowly. No urgency. A man stretching his legs. Nothing to see. He found Eli standing in the hallway between the men's room door and a fire exit that had been painted shut. The boy's back was pressed against the wall, his breath coming in shallow, stuttering pulls like a small animal trapped in a box. Mason crouched down. Not too close. He knew what closeness meant to a kid like this. It meant hands. It meant pain. "That note yours?" he said quietly. Eli didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the hallway opening, watching for the men. "Hey," Mason kept his voice low. Flat. Not gentle. Gentle would have sounded fake, and the boy would have known it instantly. Just steady. "I read it. I'm asking if it's real." Eli's chin trembled. His entire body was vibrating like a plucked wire. "They'll kill me if I talk," he whispered. "They don't know you talked. They always know." Mason studied the boy's face, the bruises under the hoodie. The way his left hand kept curling protectively over his right wrist, where the fingerprint bruises were darkest. The hollowness in his cheeks that didn't come from missing one meal, but from missing dozens. "What's your name?" Silence. "Kid. I can't help if I don't know what I'm walking into." "Eli." The name came out like a confession. "Eli Mercer." "Who are those men, Eli?" "They work for my uncle." "Work for him how?" Eli's eyes finally met Mason's, and in that look was something Mason recognized with the precision of a bullet wound, the particular expression of a child who has been screaming for help inside a system designed to not hear screaming. "My uncle owes them money," Eli said. "A lot of money. He can't pay. So they're taking my sister instead." The hallway went cold. Mason felt his heartbeat slow the way it always did before something irreversible. Not faster. Slower. The body's ancient preparation for violence or sacrifice. The cardiovascular system conserving energy like an engine dropping into a lower gear before a climb. "Taking her where?" "I don't know. Away. Tonight. After midnight." Eli's voice cracked. "She's 16. Her name's Nora. She's all I got left." "Where's your mom?" "Dead." "Dad?" "Gone. Before I was born." "Who called those men?" "My Uncle Wade. He set it up. He told Nora she was going to a job interview in Springfield. She believed him because she wanted to believe something good could happen." Eli wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "She doesn't know what's really happening." Mason leaned back on his heels. The fluorescent light above them buzzed and flickered, casting shadows that moved across the boy's face like something alive. "You tried police?" Mason asked, though he already knew the answer from the way the boy flinched at the word. "Once. Last year. After Wade beat Nora so bad she couldn't see out of her left eye for a week. I called 911 from a gas station payphone." Eli's voice went flat. Mechanical. Reciting facts he'd gone over so many times they'd lost their edges. "A lady from Child Services came out 2 weeks later. Wade was right there the whole time. He smiled at her, called us his kids, showed her the house, cleaned dishes, made beds. The lady wrote something on a clipboard and said she'd follow up." "Did she?" "No." "And after?" Eli's hand drifted unconsciously to a spot beneath his ribs on the left side. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "That's why you dropped the note on me," Mason said. "Not the truckers, not the waitress, me." Eli looked at the leather cut, the patches, the road grime and scars, and the entire brutal architecture of a man who existed outside every system that had failed him. "My dad told me once that bikers protect people nobody else will protect." Mason closed his eyes. The words hit him with the force of something biblical. Something enormous and merciless and true. And for a moment he was back in that field outside Amarillo, standing over a hole in the ground that was too small to hold a 14-year-old girl, and the air smelled like dust and mesquite and the end of everything. He opened his eyes. "Where is your sister right now?" "At the trailer. Wade's place. It's off County Road 9, past the grain elevator. She's locked in the back bedroom." "Locked?" "He put a padlock on the door yesterday. Told her it was for her safety because of the flooding. Mason stood up. His knees cracked. His back ached. Everything about his body reminded him that he was 48 years old, hadn't slept properly in half a decade, and had no business doing what he was about to do. But his hands were steady, and the note was still in his fist. He looked down at Eli. Stay in this hallway. Don't move. Don't go back to your booth. If anyone comes down here that isn't me, go out that fire exit. Kick it if you have to. And run. Don't stop running until you're somewhere with lights and people. What are you going to do? Mason didn't answer. He walked back into the diner. The noise hit him again, clattering dishes, low conversation, the storm, but now it sounded different, filtered, like hearing the world through water. His focus had narrowed to a single channel, the way it used to narrow in the yard at Potosi when someone was about to get shanked and you had about 4 seconds to decide which side of the violence you were standing on. He passed the counter. Glenda was refilling a trucker's mug, her back turned. The nursing scrub women were pulling on their coats. The jukebox stood dead and dusty in the corner. Mason pulled out his phone. He scrolled past the names he never called. The ex-wife in Topeka, the VA counselor who left voicemails he deleted without listening, the sister in Denver who'd stopped trying, and found the one number that mattered. Rooster Vale, president of the Iron Vales MC, Missouri chapter. 61 years old, Vietnam-era Marine. Voice like gravel poured over broken glass. A man who had seen every ugly thing the world could produce and responded to all of it with the same 2 words. On our way. The phone rang twice. Creed, you dead yet? Not tonight. Where are you? Clubhouse. Why? I need bodies at Ruby's Junction, off the 44 south of Waynesville. Now. Silence on the line. Not hesitation. Calculation. Rooster had been running the Vales long enough to know that Mason didn't call for favors. Mason didn't call at all. What happened? Kid slipped me a note. His sister's being trafficked tonight. Local operation. Men are here in the diner right now waiting to make the pickup. More silence. But this kind was different. This was the sound of a 61-year-old veteran's blood pressure changing. How many? 3 I can see. Could be more. Law? The kid says county sheriff's involved. Of course he is. Rooster's voice dropped an octave. Sit tight. Don't start anything you can't finish alone. I'm bringing everybody. Rooster. What? The girl's 16. The line went quiet for 5 full seconds. 20 minutes, Rooster said. Then the call ended. Mason pocketed his phone and looked toward the back booth. The 3 men were still there. The contractor was eating a burger like nothing was happening. The quiet one in the pressed shirt was checking his phone with the calm efficiency of someone confirming logistics. And the serpent-tattooed one, he was gone. Mason scanned the diner. Not at the counter, not in the booths, not near the entrance. His eyes cut to the hallway, where Eli was hiding. Mason moved. Not running. Running draws attention, but fast. His boots crossed the diner floor in 6 strides, past the counter, past the register, into the narrow hallway. Eli was still there, alone. But the fire exit door was open, the one painted shut. Someone had forced it from the outside. The frame was splintered, cold rain blowing in through the gap, the parking lot visible beyond it as a sheet of black water and headlight reflections. And on the floor just inside the door lay a single object, a lighter. The serpent-tattooed man's lighter. He'd found the hallway, found the exit, found the path. He knew exactly where Eli was. Eli looked up at Mason with eyes that said everything. They know. They saw me come to you. It's over. Mason grabbed the boy's arm, carefully because he remembered the bruises, and pulled him away from the door. Change of plans. You stay with me. Right beside me. Don't let go of my jacket. They'll have to go through me first, and I don't go down easy. They moved back into the diner together, and the moment they stepped out of the hallway, the room changed. The contractor spotted them first. His burger stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes went from Eli to Mason to the leather cut and back to Eli, and something dark passed across his face, the expression of a man watching a transaction go sideways. The quiet one looked up from his phone. His eyes locked on Mason like a targeting system. Then the front door opened and the serpent-tattooed man stepped back inside, rain dripping from his jacket, mud on his boots. He saw Mason holding Eli close, and he smiled. Not surprise, not anger, amusement. "Got yourself a new friend, kid?" he called across the diner. Every customer in Ruby's Junction felt the temperature drop. Glenda froze behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hand. Mason positioned Eli behind him and faced the three men with the stillness of a man who has already calculated every angle of violence available in the room and decided which one he'll use first. "Sit down," Mason said. "Excuse me?" "Sit down. Eat your food. Stay where I can see you." The serpent-tattooed man stopped smiling. "You have no idea what you're—" "I know exactly what you are." The words landed like a slap. The diner went silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. The quiet man in the pressed shirt set his phone on the table face down and stood up slowly. He was taller than he'd looked sitting, broader. His calm was not passivity. It was control. The kind of control that comes from being the most dangerous person in every room you enter and knowing it the way you know your own name. "Let's take this outside," the quiet man said. "No." That wasn't a suggestion. And that wasn't a question. Mason's voice didn't rise. "You're staying inside, all three of you, until my people get here. Your people. You'll hear them before you see them." Something flickered in the quiet man's eyes, the first crack in his composure. The serpent-tattooed one looked toward the windows, where rain was still hammering the glass and the parking lot was a swamp. "You're making a very large mistake," the quiet man said. "Wouldn't be my first." The contractor reached into his jacket. Mason covered the distance in 2 steps. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it backward with a mechanical precision that came from decades of practice, bar fights, prison yards, road confrontations, until the contractor's fingers opened and a folding knife clattered onto the table. Mason swept the knife off the edge, sent it spinning across the linoleum. "Anybody else carrying?" he said to the room. Nobody answered. Nobody moved. Eli pressed tighter against Mason's back, his small fingers curled into the leather so hard his knuckles had gone white. Then from outside, through the rain and wind and everything else, a sound. Low at first, like distant thunder. But thunder doesn't have a rhythm. This did. Engines. Motorcycle engines. 1, then 3, then 6, then more, multiplying, layering, building into a wall of sound that rattled the diner windows and vibrated through the floor and filled Ruby's Junction with a rumble so deep it lived in the chest more than the ears. Headlights swept across the parking lot. One by one, motorcycles materialized out of the storm like ghosts assembling for war. They parked in a line across the front of the building. Harleys, Indians, Customs, all of them streaked with rain and road grime. And men began dismounting with the unhurried coordination of soldiers who had done this before. Leather cuts in the downpour, iron veils patches, beards and scars and boots hitting gravel. Rooster Vale was first through the door. He stood 6'4", with a face that looked like it had been carved from the side of a mountain by someone who didn't care about aesthetics. White hair tied back, reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck, incongruously gentle against the wall of muscle beneath his cut. He swept the diner with a single glance and found Mason. Then found Eli. Then found the 3 men. His expression didn't change. It didn't need to. Behind him, 12 more bikers filed in. They didn't sit. They stood along the walls by the door beside the windows. Not aggressive, not posturing, just present, filling the room with a mass and a silence that communicated more than any threat could. The serpent-tattooed man looked from face to face. The contractor pulled his injured wrist against his chest. The quiet man in the pressed shirt remained standing, but for the first time all night, his hands were not still. They were shaking. Rooster walked to this counter, poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Glenda had forgotten she was holding, took a sip, and set the cup down. "Now then," he said, his voice carrying without effort to every corner of the room. "Someone want to tell me where the girl is?" Nobody spoke. And somewhere outside Black Hollow, in a rusted trailer off County Road 9, past a dead grain elevator in a flooded field, a 16-year-old girl named Nora Mercer sat on a bare mattress behind a padlocked door, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, and wondering why her uncle had promised her the morning would change everything. She had no way of knowing it already had. She had no way of knowing that her little brother had done the bravest thing anyone in Black Hollow had done in years. And she had no way of knowing that the clock on the trailer wall now read 11:17 p.m. 43 minutes before the men were scheduled to arrive, take her from the only home she had left and turn her into something that would never come back. The padlock held, the rain kept falling, and somewhere on a dark road between Ruby's Junction and County Road 9, a fourth vehicle was already moving, headlights off, engine quiet. Someone had made a call, and now the schedule had changed. They weren't coming at midnight anymore. They were coming now. The quiet man in the pressed shirt was the first to break. Not visibly, not the way most people break, with trembling hands or a raised voice or the sudden stupid lurch toward the nearest exit. No, he broke the way professionals break, with a phone call. Mason saw it happen in real time. The man's hand drifted toward his pocket, smooth, casual, the movement of someone checking the time. And Mason crossed the distance between them so fast that Glenda dropped the coffee pot and it shattered across the floor in a brown, steaming lake. He grabbed the man's wrist and slammed it flat on the table. The phone clattered face up. An outgoing call. 11 seconds. Already connected. Someone on the other end had heard everything. Mason killed the call and pocketed the phone. "Who was that?" he said. The quiet man looked at him with the first real expression he'd shown all night. Not fear, not anger. Something worse. Pity. "You just bought that girl a bullet," the man said. The diner went dead silent. Rooster set down his coffee cup. Outside, rain hammered the motorcycles lined up in the parking lot like sentinels. Engines were still ticking, cooling in the storm. Somewhere beyond the neon haze of Ruby's Junction, a set of headlights was moving through the dark toward a rusted trailer on County Road 9. And every second that passed without action was a second that might already be too late. "Who did he call?" Rooster asked. His voice was flat, not angry. Flat was worse. Mason held up the phone. Recent calls. No names. Just numbers. The last outgoing connected to a number with an Oklahoma area code. "Doesn't matter who," the serpent-tattooed man said from his booth, leaning back with his arms crossed like a spectator at a sporting event. "What matters is they know." "Know what?" Rooster said. "That you're here. That someone talked." The serpent-tattooed man tilted his head toward Eli, who was still pressed behind Mason, his fingers white-knuckled in the leather cut. "And that the merchandise has complications now." Merchandise. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Rooster's jaw shifted. The bikers along the walls didn't move, but something changed in the room. A collective hardening, the way metal changes temperature before it reaches the point where it can cut. Mason looked down at the phone. Thought about the call. 11 seconds. Enough time for one sentence, maybe two. Enough to say, "We've been made. Move the girl." "We go now," Mason said. "Hold on." Rooster raised a hand, not dismissive, measured. "Where's the federal contact? You said task force." "I said I fed them intel. I didn't say they're on standby." "Then get them on standby." "Rooster, by the time the feds mobilize out of Springfield, that girl could be in a trunk heading south on the 65. We don't have time for chain of command. And we don't have authority to kick down doors." "Since when has that stopped us?" The two men stared at each other across the diner counter with the weight of 20 years of shared history pressing down between them. They'd ridden together through ice storms in Montana. They'd sat in hospital waiting rooms after brothers went down on the highway. They'd buried men they loved in dirt that felt too cold to hold the weight of what those men had meant. And through all of it, there had been a line, blurry, shifting, argued over in smoky clubhouse meetings at 3 a.m, between what the iron veils were and what they refused to become. Rooster believed in that line, had dedicated his life to keeping the brotherhood on the right side of it. Mason had spent the last 6 years not caring where the line was, and tonight that difference was about to become a fracture. "We roll in there without a plan, without backup, without legal cover," Rooster said slowly, "and somebody gets shot. Maybe one of us. Maybe the girl. And if a federal investigation is active and we contaminate their scene, those traffickers walk. Every one of them, on a technicality, because a bunch of bikers played cowboy. She won't be alive for a trial if we don't move. You don't know that. I know what the man just said. He said I bought her a bullet. You want to wait and find out if he's bluffing? Rooster didn't answer. He pulled his reading glasses off the cord around his neck and cleaned them with the hem of his flannel. A gesture Mason had seen 100 times, always when Rooster was processing something too heavy for a quick response. Behind them, one of the bikers near the door, a younger rider named Jenks, mid-30s, Iraq veteran, prosthetic left hand concealed under a leather glove, stepped forward. "Prez," Jenks said, "I know that trailer park off County Road 9. Hauled scrap out of there last winter. There's a dirt service road on the east side that runs along the tree line. Blind approach. No lights." Rooster looked at him. "If we're going," Jenks said, "that's how." Something rippled through the room. The other bikers were listening, not speaking, but their silence had a direction now, the way wind has direction. They were waiting for Rooster's call, and every one of them already knew what they wanted it to be. Rooster put his glasses back on. "Creed," he said, "step outside with me." Mason followed him through the front door into the rain. The parking lot was a shallow lake reflecting neon and lightning. The motorcycles stood in their wet formation, chrome-catching colors that didn't exist in nature. Rain hit Mason's face and ran down into his collar, but he barely felt it. His body was running on something older than adrenaline, a current that had been dormant for years and was now humming through his blood like a generator coming back online after a blackout. Rooster stood with his back to the diner, facing the road. He pulled a cigarette from his vest pocket and lit it under cupped hands, the flame briefly turning his face into a sculpture of lines and shadows. "Talk to me about Lily." Mason's throat closed. "Don't," he said. "I have to, because you're about to take my entire chapter into a hostile situation for a girl you've never met based on a note from a kid you found 10 minutes ago. And the only reason you're pushing this hard isn't because of tonight. It's because of 6 years ago." "That doesn't change what's happening." "No, but it changes how you're making decisions. And right now I need you clear, Creed, not running on guilt. I'm clear." Rooster turned to face him. Rain ran down his white hair and dripped off his jaw. His eyes, pale gray, the color of river ice, held Mason's with the surgical steadiness of a man who had spent 50 years learning how to see through every kind of armor a human being could wear. "Are you?" he said. Not a question. Mason said nothing. Because the truth was, Rooster was right. The truth was that from the moment Eli's note had landed in his hand, Mason's mind had split in two. One half here, in this parking lot, in this storm, calculating distances and threats and exit routes, and the other half in a field outside Amarillo, kneeling in red dirt beside a hole that was too small, staring at a white evidence tarp that covered something he would never be able to uncover in his memory, no matter how many years passed or how many miles he rode. He couldn't separate the two, couldn't pretend that Nora Mercer was just another case. She was already Lily in his mind, already the ghost he failed, already the girl behind the locked door that he should have been standing outside of 6 years ago instead of sitting in a concrete cell watching cockroaches cross the floor while his daughter was being loaded into the back of a stranger's truck. "I can't leave her in that trailer," Mason said. His voice cracked on the word trailer, just barely, enough for Rooster to notice. "I know what you're saying, and I know you're right, and I can't leave her." Rooster smoked in silence for a long moment. Rain filled the pause. "I made a call while you were inside," Rooster said finally. "Agent named Tara Sinclair, FBI task force out of Springfield. We've been feeding her intel for 4 months on trafficking routes through the corridor, 44, 65, down to the Arkansas line, missing women, girls going dark at truck stops, patterns. You didn't tell me about this. You weren't in a place to hear it." That landed. Hard. "She's mobilizing," Rooster continued, "but she's 2 hours out, maybe 90 minutes if the roads cooperate. We don't have 90 minutes. "I know." Rooster dropped the cigarette into a puddle. It hissed and died. "That's why we're going now. But we go my way. We contain the site. We don't engage unless they force it. We hold position until the feds arrive and let them make the arrest." And if the girl's already being moved, then we follow, and we call it in, and we do not turn this into something that ends with a body bag. Rooster? I lost brothers before, Creed. I'm not losing one tonight because he couldn't tell the difference between saving a life and punishing himself. The words hit like cold water. Mason looked away. Across the parking lot, through the rain, he could see the glow of the diner windows. Inside, Eli was standing between 12 bikers, surrounded by men who looked like the kind of monsters the world warned children about, and for the first time in maybe his entire life, the boy looked safe. "Your way," Mason said. Rooster nodded. "My way." They went back inside. The three traffickers were still seated, but the energy had shifted. The contractor was sweating. The serpent-tattooed man's cockiness had curdled into something tight and calculating, his eyes moving between the bikers like he was counting exits. And the quiet man in the pressed shirt, the one whose phone call had just accelerated everything, sat with his hands flat on the table, perfectly still, watching Rooster with the focused attention of a man recalculating odds. "Jenks," Rooster said, "your point. Take Mackie and Devlin. East approach through the service road. Eyes only until I give the word." Jenks nodded once and headed for the door with two riders behind him. "Coyle, Brennan, you're blocking County Road 9 at both ends. Nobody in, nobody out." Two more bikers moved. "The rest of you, with me. We convoy to the site and hold the perimeter." Rooster looked at the three traffickers. "You boys sit tight. Someone's coming to talk to you real soon." "You can't hold us here," the quiet man said. "I'm not holding you. I'm suggesting you stay and enjoy the coffee. Because if you walk out that door and show up anywhere near County Road 9 tonight, what happens next won't involve paperwork." The quiet man's eyes shifted to the serpent-tattooed one. Some communication passed between them. A micro-expression. A decision made in the space between blinks. "Fine," the quiet man said. "We'll wait." He said it too easily. Mason caught it. Rooster caught it. The compliance was wrong. Too smooth. Like a door opening in a place where all doors should be locked. But there was no time to parse it. Rooster stationed two bikers inside the diner, an enormous, silent man named Hull, whose beard reached his sternum, and a wiry, twitchy rider named Patchwork, who had earned his nickname from the knife scars covering his forearms. And the rest of the chapter moved. The parking lot erupted. 12 motorcycles firing simultaneously in the rain, a wall of sound that shook the ground and rattled the diner windows and sent vibrations through Mason's chest that felt like a second heartbeat. He swung onto his Harley, a 2004 Road King, matte black, stripped of everything decorative, a machine built for distance and punishment, and Eli climbed on behind him without hesitation. "Hold tight," Mason said. The boy's arms wrapped around his waist, small, thin, desperate, and strong. Stronger than a 10-year-old should have to be. They rode. The convoy moved through Black Hollow like a funeral procession with teeth. Single file through the flooded streets, past shuttered storefronts and dark houses and a gas station where the pumps stood like gravestones in the rain. Nobody honked. Nobody pulled over to let them pass. The few cars on the road simply stopped and watched, the way animals freeze when predators cross their territory. Mason rode second behind Rooster, the rain stinging his face, Eli's weight pressed against his back. The boy hadn't spoken since they left the diner. He didn't need to. His silence carried everything: hope, terror, guilt, the crushing knowledge that he had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, and the older, heavier knowledge that if it went wrong, his sister would pay the price. They turned south off Main Street onto the county highway. The road narrowed. Streetlights disappeared. The darkness outside Black Hollow was total. The kind of darkness that cities have forgotten exists, where the sky and the ground merge into a single black mass, and the only thing that proves you're still moving is the rain hitting your face and the vibration of the engine beneath you. 4 miles out, Rooster raised a fist. The convoy slowed. They killed their headlights one by one, riding by memory and lightning flashes along a gravel road that veered east off the highway toward a tree line that was barely visible as a darker shade of black against the sky. Mason's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Jenks. On site. Trailer dark. 1 vehicle out front. Pickup truck. Plates covered. Then, 10 seconds later. Second vehicle just arrived. No headlights. Parking behind trailer. Mason showed the phone to Rooster, who had pulled alongside him on the gravel shoulder. Rooster's jaw clenched. The second vehicle. The one that had been moving in the dark. The one that had changed the schedule after the quiet man's phone call. They weren't waiting until midnight. They were already there. "How long ago?" Rooster asked. Mason texted. The response came in 4 seconds. "Just now. 2 men exiting, heading to trailer." Eli stiffened behind Mason. "They're going inside," the boy whispered. Mason looked at Rooster. The older man's face was unreadable in the dark. Just angles and shadows and rain. "We're out of time," Mason said. "Sinclair's still an hour out." "Then we don't wait." "Creed, I'm not asking permission." The words hung between them. 20 years of brotherhood, 20 years of trust. And now, on a dark road in a flooded nowhere county, all of it balanced on the edge of a decision that would either save a girl or destroy everything the Iron Veils had built. Rooster stared at him. Mason stared back. And behind Mason, a 10-year-old boy held on tighter and whispered something so quietly it was almost swallowed by the rain. "Please." One word, the same word that had been written on the note. Rooster closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, something had changed. Not his expression, his posture. A shift in the spine. The way a soldier looks when orders stop mattering and the only thing left is what you can live with after. "Jenks," Rooster said into his phone, "move to the tree line. Mark exits. Nobody leaves that trailer. We're coming in." He looked at Mason. "No weapons unless they draw first. We contain, we extract, we protect the girl and anyone else inside. And when the feds show up, we hand them a scene that doesn't include a body. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Say it back." "No bodies." Rooster nodded. Then he raised his arm, circled it once in the air, and dropped it forward. The convoy surged. They came through the tree line like a black wave. No headlights, no engines above idle, just the wet hiss of tires on mud and the low mechanical growl of 12 Harleys moving in formation through the dark. The trailer park materialized ahead, a clearing of dead grass and standing water surrounded by scrub oaks, 4 or 5 derelict trailers scattered like broken teeth, and at the far end, the one that mattered. Wade Mercer's trailer. A single wide with rust eating through the siding and a caved-in awning hanging over a front door illuminated by a bare bulb crawling with moths. The pickup truck Jenks had described was parked at an angle out front, its bed loaded with tarps and bungee cords. Behind the trailer, barely visible, was the second vehicle. A dark-colored SUV with tinted windows and mud caked up to the door handles. Its engine was still running, waiting. Mason killed his Harley and helped Eli off. He crouched down and gripped the boy's shoulders. "You stay here, behind this tree. Do not move until I come back for you." "I want to come." "No." "She's my sister, and you already saved her. You did that, in the diner, with the note. Everything that happens from here is because of what you already did. Now let me finish it." Eli's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. He pressed his lips together, nodded once, and backed against the tree trunk. Mason stood. The bikers had fanned out through the tree line in a loose crescent, surrounding the trailer on 3 sides. Jenks and his team covered the east. Coyle and Brennan held the road. Rooster stood at the center of the formation, just inside the shadow line, reading the scene. 2 men had entered through the front door. No sounds from inside. Then, a scream. Muffled, female, short, cut off. Every biker in the tree line went rigid. Mason took a step forward. Rooster grabbed his arm. "Together," the old man said, "or not at all." They moved as one, boots through mud and standing water, leather soaking in the rain, the smell of wet earth and rust and the faint chemical sweetness of a meth cook that had happened somewhere in this trailer park not long ago. Mason reached the front door first. The bare bulb cast his shadow long and thin across the wooden steps. He could hear voices inside now, so low, male, urgent, and beneath them, the sound of someone crying. Not sobbing, not screaming, the quiet, airless crying of someone who has already stopped expecting rescue. Mason put his hand on the door handle. It was locked. He looked at Rooster. The old man nodded. Mason kicked the door in. It took one hit. The frame was rotten. The door exploded inward with a crack that split the night, and the inside of Wade Mercer's trailer opened up before them like the exposed cavity of something that had been decaying from within for years. Filth. That was the first thing. Pizza boxes stacked on a counter beside empty bottles of Jim Beam and a sink overflowing with dishes that had grown fur. The carpet was stained with things Mason didn't want to identify. The ceiling sagged with water damage. The air smelled like mildew, stale cigarettes, and the animal tang of fear sweat. Two men stood in the narrow hallway leading to the back bedroom. One was Wade Mercer, mid-50s, gaunt, sunken eyes, a patchy beard covering a weak chin and a mouth that couldn't commit to an expression. He wore a stained undershirt and jeans that hung off his hip bones. He looked like what he was, a coward hollowed out by substances and failure who had found one final way to profit from the people who depended on him. The other man was someone Mason had never seen. Young, maybe 30, clean-cut, a Carhartt jacket over a polo shirt, work boots that were too clean for this trailer park. He had the look of middle management, the kind of man who stands between the people who give orders and the people who carry them out, insulated enough to feel safe, involved enough to feel important. He was holding a roll of duct tape. Behind them, the padlocked bedroom door was open. And inside, sitting on a bare mattress with her knees pulled to her chest and her hair hanging over her face, was Nora Mercer. 16 years old, thin, pale, dark circles under eyes that were red from crying and wild with a terror so deep it had gone past screaming into a place where the body simply shuts down and waits for whatever is coming because fighting has never worked before and won't work now. She was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. Her shoes were gone. Her wrists had red marks where something had already been wrapped around them and removed. She looked at Mason and saw a stranger in a leather cut filling her uncle's doorway. And she flinched, because in Nora Mercer's experience, men in doorways meant pain. Wade reacted first. "Who the hell are you? Get out of my house. This is my house. I'll call the police." "Go ahead," Mason said. "Call them. We'll wait." Wade's mouth opened and closed. The threat had backfired, and the realization moved across his face like a shadow. The man with the duct tape was smarter. His eyes went to the open front door, to the shapes moving in the darkness beyond, leather and chrome catching the bare bulb's light, and he understood immediately. He dropped the tape and raised his hands. "I'm just a driver," he said. "I don't know anything about—" "Shut up," Rooster said from behind Mason. He stepped into the trailer, his massive frame filling the hallway, and looked past both men to the girl on the mattress. His voice changed. It became something Mason had only heard twice in 20 years. Once at a military funeral in Virginia, and once at a hospital bedside in Joplin, where a brother's 6-year-old was losing a fight with leukemia. "Nora," Rooster said. Quiet, steady. The voice of someone who understood that this girl had been screamed at and lied to and handled by violent men for so long that anything loud or fast would shatter whatever was left of her. "Nora, my name is Rooster. Your brother sent us." The girl didn't move. "Eli's outside. He's safe. He wrote a note tonight and gave it to someone who could help. That's why we're here." A sound came from Nora's throat. Not a word. An animal sound, the sound of something unclenching that had been locked tight for months. "You're leaving this place tonight," Rooster said. "Not with them. With us. And nobody is going to touch you again." Wade lunged. Not at Rooster, at the back window. A desperate, scrambling attempt to flee that lasted exactly 1.5 seconds before Mason caught his collar and slammed him into the hallway wall hard enough to crack the drywall. "You sold your niece," Mason said, his face inches from Wade's. "Your brother's daughter. She's 16 years old and you put a price on her." Wade's eyes were wet. Not with remorse, with self-pity. The particular nauseating wetness of a man who has done something unforgivable and is already constructing the narrative in which he's the victim. "You don't understand," Wade whimpered. "You don't know what they would have done to me." Mason's fist tightened on the man's collar. Rooster's hand landed on Mason's shoulder. "Not tonight," the old man said. Mason held Wade's gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he released him. Wade slid down the wall and crumpled onto the filthy carpet, and Mason stepped over him like he was stepping over garbage. The man with the duct tape hadn't moved. Jenks appeared in the back door. He'd circled the trailer, and zip-tied the man's wrists behind his back with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this in Fallujah. Outside, the SUV's engine was still running. "Coyle," Rooster called into his phone. "Check that vehicle." 30 seconds of silence. Then Coyle's voice, shaking in a way that Coyle's voice never shook. "Press. You need to come see this." Mason and Rooster stepped out into the rain. Coyle was standing at the open rear hatch of the SUV, his flashlight illuminating the cargo area. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, a case of bottled water, a bag of fast food, and a box of disposable phones still in their packaging. And beneath the sleeping bags, 2 more sets of duct tape, a bottle of chloroform, and a printed list. 4 names, 4 addresses. Nora Mercer was third on the list. The first 2 names had lines drawn through them. Mason stared at the list. Rain fell on the paper, blurring the ink, but the crossed-out names were still legible. 2 girls. One from Rogers, Arkansas. One from Neosho, Missouri. Ages printed beside their names. 15. 13. Already taken. Already gone. Rooster took the list from Mason's hands. He read it once. He read it again. Then he folded it carefully into his vest pocket and looked at Mason with an expression that contained no words because no words existed for what they'd just found. The 4th name on the list was uncrossed, a girl in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She was next, and she was 12. Mason's phone rang. He answered without checking the number. "Mr. Creed." A woman's voice, professional, controlled. "This is Special Agent Tara Sinclair. I'm en route with a federal team. ETA approximately 75 minutes. I need you to secure the scene and not touch anything." "There's a list," Mason said. 4 names, 2 already taken. We have the 3rd. The 4th is in Tahlequah. Silence on the line. "Tahlequah is outside my jurisdiction. She's 12. "I understand that, but then make a call." "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Sinclair paused. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, the professionalism replaced by something raw, something that sounded like it was fighting its way through years of training. "Secure your scene. Don't let anyone leave. I'll handle Tahlequah." The call ended. Mason stood in the rain. His clothes were soaked through. His hands were shaking, not from cold, not from adrenaline, but from the particular vibration of a man standing at the edge of a truth so ugly it reconfigures everything he thought he understood about where he was and what was happening. This wasn't a desperate uncle selling one girl to pay a debt. This was a supply chain, and Nora was just the next item on the invoice. From inside the trailer, Mason heard a sound that broke through everything else. The rain, the engines, the static of his own spiraling thoughts. Nora's voice. "Eli?" And from behind the oak tree, running through the mud with no regard for the promise he'd made to stay put, came her brother. The boy crashed into the trailer and threw himself at his sister so hard they both fell off the mattress onto the floor. She grabbed him. He grabbed her. And they held each other in that filthy room surrounded by bikers and bound men and the evidence of something monstrous. And the sound they made together was not crying. It was something before crying, something before language. The raw, gutted animal sound of 2 children who had been drowning separately for 8 months, discovering they were still alive at the same time. Mason turned away. He walked out into the rain and stood beside his motorcycle and pressed both hands against the wet seat and breathed. Behind him, Rooster was barking orders into his phone. Jenks was photographing the SUV's contents. Coyle and Brennan were reinforcing the roadblocks. And somewhere in a county sheriff's office 18 miles north, a phone was ringing. Because Hull, the silent giant left guarding the traffickers at Ruby's Junction, had just sent a 2-word text to Rooster. "They're gone." The 3 men at the diner, the contractor, the serpent tattoo, the quiet man in the pressed shirt, gone. Hull and Patchwork had been overpowered while the convoy was in transit. The traffickers had walked out the back door of Ruby's Junction into the storm, climbed into a vehicle that had been waiting in the gravel lot behind the dead gas station, and vanished. Which meant they knew where the bikers were. They knew Nora had been pulled. They knew the list had been found. And they knew that every second the Iron Veils spent at this trailer was a second someone higher up the chain was using to make phone calls, destroy evidence, and move the operation underground. Mason read Hull's text 3 times. Then he looked up at the dark road stretching south out of Black Hollow, toward the state line, toward the interstate arteries that connected small-town Missouri to everywhere a girl could disappear. The quiet man's words echoed back through the rain. "You just bought that girl a bullet." Mason pulled the crumpled note from his pocket. Eli's handwriting, pencil on lined paper, already dissolving in the rain. Please don't let them take my sister tonight. He had kept the promise, but the list had 4 names, and the men who made that list were now in the wind with nothing left to lose and every reason to burn it all down before the feds arrived. Mason folded the note back into his fist, climbed onto his Harley, and looked at Rooster through the rain. "This isn't over," he said. Rooster stared at the dark southern road. "No," he said quietly. "It just started. The rain didn't stop. It just got meaner." Mason stood beside his Harley in the mud outside Wade Mercer's trailer, reading Hull's text for the 4th time like the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. "They're gone." 2 words, the kind that rewrite every calculation you've made in the last hour and leave you standing in the wreckage of a plan that no longer exists. Rooster was already on the phone, pacing the gravel shoulder with his cigarette burning down to the filter between his lips. His voice was low and controlled, but Mason could hear the edges fraying. The particular strain of a man giving orders while simultaneously realizing those orders might no longer be sufficient. "Hull, talk to me. What happened?" The giant's voice came through the speaker tinny and broken. "Patchwork went to check the back hall. 30 seconds. That's all it was. When he came back, the booth was empty. Back door was open. Vehicle was already gone." "Did they take anything?" "The quiet one's phone. Creed had it on the counter." Mason's stomach dropped. He'd taken the phone, set it on the counter, left it there when they scrambled to ride. The phone with the Oklahoma number. The phone that was now back in the hands of the man who'd used it to accelerate Nora's extraction. The phone that contained contacts, logistics, the entire nervous system of an operation that stretched across 4 states. "That's on me," Mason said. Rooster didn't look at him, didn't need to. The silence between them carried the weight of the mistake more effectively than any words could. Inside the trailer, Jenks had moved Nora and Eli to the front room, away from the filthy back bedroom, away from the padlocked door and the bare mattress, and the memory of what almost happened. Nora sat on a stained couch with Eli pressed into her side, her arm wrapped around his shoulders so tightly it looked like she was trying to physically prevent the world from pulling him away. She hadn't spoken since she'd said her brother's name. Her eyes were open but unfocused, locked on a middle distance where nothing existed except the effort of continued breathing. Eli watched the bikers through the trailer's cracked window with an expression that oscillated between hope and the particular vigilance of a child who had learned that safety was always temporary. Wade Mercer sat zip-tied on the kitchen floor, his back against the cabinet under the sink, a thin line of blood running from his nose where he'd hit the wall. He hadn't stopped talking since Mason kicked the door in. A stream of excuses, justifications, self-pitying rationalizations that blurred together into a single unbroken whine. "They made me do it. I didn't have a choice. You don't know what they threatened. I was protecting the kids in my own way. I was going to get them back. I had a plan. I was going to fix it." Nobody listened. The sound of his voice had become background noise, like static or rain, present but meaningless. The man with the duct tape, the driver, sat zip-tied beside the back door. He'd said nothing since his initial attempt at denial. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were closed. He was calculating. Mason recognized the posture of a man cycling through his legal options, rehearsing the phrases his lawyer would use, building the distance between himself and accountability, one mental brick at a time. "Jenks," Mason said from the doorway. "What's on the driver's phone?" Jenks held up the device. "Locked. Fingerprint." Mason looked at the driver. The driver opened his eyes. "I want a lawyer," he said. "I'm not a cop." "I know what you are. And I'm not talking to you." Mason crouched down until they were eye level. The trailer's bare bulb cast shadows across both their faces, turning the narrow hallway into something that felt like an interrogation room. or a confessional. There are 2 girls already gone, Mason said, Rogers and Neosho. Crossed off a list we found in your vehicle. You know where they are. Lawyer. A 12-year-old in Tahlequah is next. You know where she's being held. Lawyer. Her name is probably on the paperwork in your glove box right now. The feds are 70 minutes out. That's 70 minutes you have to decide whether you're the guy who helped save a 12-year-old or the guy who let her disappear because he was protecting his own. I said lawyer. Mason stood up. His hands were shaking again, not from cold, from the volcanic pressure of wanting to do something with his fists that he'd promised Rooster he wouldn't do. Creed. Rooster's voice from outside, sharp. The one-word summons that meant now. Mason stepped out into the rain. Rooster was standing beside the SUV's open hatch, his flashlight aimed at the printed list they'd found beneath the sleeping bags. But he wasn't looking at the list. He was looking at something else, a manila folder that had been tucked beneath the floor mat of the cargo area, hidden with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that certain documents needed to survive even if the vehicle didn't. Jenks found this when he pulled the sleeping bags out, Rooster said. It was under the liner. He opened the folder. Inside were photocopied pages. Poor quality, slightly crooked, the kind of copies made on a gas station machine at 2 in the morning. School photos of girls, names, ages, addresses. Physical descriptions written in a clinical shorthand that read like livestock inventory. Height, weight, hair color, eye color. And beside each entry a notation Mason didn't immediately understand. A series of letters and numbers. RV4, SL2, KT7. Route codes, Rooster said quietly. Interstate designations. RV is likely Route 65 through Branson. SL is state line, the 71 corridor into Arkansas. KT, he trailed off. What? KT was a code the Vales used 15 years ago, internal shorthand for the Kansas to Texas run through Wichita and Oklahoma City. Mason stared at him. Our code? Not ours, but someone who knew our roots, someone who rode with us or spent enough time inside the chapter to know our logistics. The rain seemed to get louder, or maybe the world just got quieter. Mason couldn't tell. The implication sat between them like an unexploded shell, ticking, waiting, demanding acknowledgement. You're saying someone in the Iron Vales fed route intelligence to a trafficking operation. I'm saying the code matches, and I'm saying I need to find out why before I start making accusations that blow this brotherhood apart. Who had access to those route codes? 15 years ago? 30? Maybe 40 riders across 3 chapters: Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma. Rooster's flashlight moved across the pages. Most of them are dead or retired, but not all. Names. Creed. Names, Rooster. The old man looked at him over the rim of his reading glasses with an expression that was part exhaustion, part warning, and part something Mason had never seen in Rooster's face before. Fear. Not fear of violence or confrontation. Fear of what the answer might be. There's one name I keep coming back to, Rooster said, and you're not going to want to hear it. Say it. Dex Harmon. The name landed like a hammer on glass. Dex Harmon, 43. Former Sergeant-at-Arms for the Iron Vales, Oklahoma chapter. A man Mason had ridden with for 6 years. A man who'd carried Mason out of a bar in Tulsa when a fight went sideways and Mason took a pool cue to the ribs. A man who'd sat beside Mason at Lily's memorial service, the service without a body, because the body was evidence, and said nothing, because Dex understood that some grief was too deep for words, and the only honest response was presence. Dex had left the Vales 3 years ago, said he was tired, said the road was eating his knees and his marriage and his ability to sleep without checking the locks. He'd moved to Joplin, opened an auto parts store, and faded into the kind of quiet civilian life that most bikers talked about wanting but never actually pursued. Mason had called him once, about a year after he left. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Dex sounded different, distracted, like he was talking through a wall. Mason chalked it up to retirement adjustment and never called again. Now the route code said something else. Dex rode the KT run personally, Rooster said. 12, 13 years ago. He knew every stop, every timing window, every unmonitored stretch of highway between Wichita and Dallas. If someone wanted to move girls along that corridor without getting flagged, they'd need exactly that information. That doesn't mean he sold it. No, but his auto parts store in Joplin was leased through a holding company I've never heard of, and that holding company has an address in Tulsa that I had Mackie run while you were inside. Rooster paused. Same address as a trucking dispatch company called Corridor Logistics. Never heard of it. Nobody has, because it doesn't move freight. It files paperwork. It creates schedules. It generates manifests for shipments that don't exist, loads that never arrive, trucks that reroute without explanation, trailers that cross state lines with sealed cargo and no inspection. The pieces click together in Mason's mind with the awful precision of a lock turning. It's a logistics front, he said, for moving people. And Dex is tied to it. Dex's name isn't on any of the documents, but his money is, and his knowledge is. And those route codes are sitting in a folder that was found in a vehicle that came to pick up a 16-year-old girl tonight. Mason's legs felt unstable, not from exhaustion, from the specific vertigo of discovering that the ground you've been standing on has been hollowed out, that the foundations you trusted were built on rot, and that the betrayal didn't come from the enemy. It came from inside the house, inside the Brotherhood. Does anyone else know? Mason asked. Just us. And I want it to stay that way until I'm sure. How do you get sure? I make a phone call I've been putting off for 3 years. Rooster pulled out his phone and dialed. The line rang 5 times. A voice answered. Groggy. Irritated. The voice of a man pulled from sleep by a number he recognized and didn't want to see. Rooster, it's past midnight. Dex, we need to talk. Silence. The kind that has weight. The kind that fills with everything the person on the other end is choosing not to say. About what? Corridor logistics. The silence changed. It became something solid. A wall built in real time, brick by brick, between 2 men who had once bled for each other. I don't know what that is, Dex said. Don't do that. I'm serious, Rooster. I don't. We're at a trailer outside Black Hollow tonight. A girl was being picked up for transport on routes you used to ride, routes you mapped, routes nobody outside this Brotherhood was supposed to know. And in the SUV that came to collect her, we found paperwork with our internal codes, KT7, your run, your corridor, your numbers. Breathing on the line, heavy, unsteady. The breathing of a man whose carefully constructed partition between his 2 lives had just been demolished. It wasn't supposed to... Dex's voice cracked. Rooster, I needed money. The store was going under. My wife left. I owed people you don't want to owe, and they came to me with an offer, and I told them I was out after the first time. I swear I told them. How many girls, Dex? I didn't count. I just gave them the routes. I never touched anyone. How many girls used the corridors you sold? Silence. Then very quietly, I don't know. Maybe 20. Over 3 years. Mason's vision went white. Not from rage, from something beyond rage. Something that lived in the marrow of his bones where Lily's name was carved. A reaction so primal it bypassed every cognitive process and went straight to the part of his brain that understood with absolute molecular certainty that a man he'd loved like a brother had helped build the machine that chewed up girls like his daughter and spat them into graves. Rooster kept his voice steady. Barely. The 2 girls already taken, Rogers and Neosho. Where are they? I don't have that information anymore. They cut me out 6 months ago. After the feds started sniffing around Springfield, the operation went dark. New contacts, new codes. I've been on the outside since... You've been on the outside since the money stopped, Dex. Don't dress it up. Rooster, who runs it? The whole thing. Not the drivers, not the muscle in the diner. Who runs the operation? Silence again, longer this time. The rain was so loud against the trailer's metal roof that Mason could barely hear the phone, but he could hear the breathing, ragged, wet, the sound of a man who knew that the next words out of his mouth would end his life in every way that mattered. His name is Lyle Castor, Dex whispered. He runs distribution out of a ranch property south of Neosho. The ranch is listed under an agricultural trust, something with the word heartland in it. That's where the girls go first. That's the processing center. After that, they get moved to buyers through the routes. Processing center. Rooster repeated the words like they were made of acid. You're talking about human beings, Dex. I know what I'm talking about. No, you don't, because if you did, you'd have eaten a bullet by now instead of making me drag it out of you. The line went quiet. Turn yourself in, Rooster said. Tonight. Call Tara Sinclair at the FBI Springfield office. Tell her everything you just told me. Do it before sunrise, and I'll make sure the Vales don't come looking for you. That's the best deal you'll ever get from me. Rooster, please. There's nothing else I can offer a man who sold the road. He hung up. The phone stayed in his hand. Rain ran over it. His thumb rested on the screen like he was about to throw it into the mud. Mason watched him. For the first time in 20 years of riding together, Rooster looked old. Not weathered, not road-worn. Old. The kind of old that settles into a man when he discovers that loyalty, the one currency he never questioned, the one foundation he believed was unbreakable, has been counterfeit all along. Lyle Castor, Mason said. I've heard the name peripherally. He's connected to agricultural money in the area. Cattle operations, land trusts. The kind of legitimate front that makes a man invisible because nobody looks twice at a rancher. The ranch south of Neosho. That's where the other two girls are. If they're still alive. Sinclair needs this information. I know. Rooster pulled out a fresh cigarette but didn't light it. He just held it between his fingers, rolling it back and forth like a rosary without beads. But there's a problem. What problem? The three men who walked out of Ruby's Junction, the contractor, the serpent tattoo, the quiet one, they're not foot soldiers. The quiet man's composure, the way he managed that diner, the phone call. He's connected to Castor, maybe directly. And now he's in the wind with the phone you took from him, which means he's already called in what happened here. Which means Castor knows. Which means Castor is cleaning house right now, moving product, shredding evidence, shutting down the ranch before Sinclair can get a warrant. Then we go to the ranch. Creed, that's a federal investigation. We can't. Two girls are in there, Rooster, right now. While we stand here in the rain having this conversation, there are two girls inside that ranch who are either being moved or being killed to eliminate witnesses. You want to stand here and wait for jurisdiction? I want to not get my brothers killed charging a fortified property with no intel, no backup, and no legal. Legal didn't save Nora tonight. We did. Rooster's jaw clenched so hard Mason could see the tendons in his neck standing out like cables. He stared at the younger man with an intensity that bordered on violence, the gaze of a leader being pushed past the boundary he'd spent his entire life defending. You're asking me to cross a line I can't uncross. I'm telling you the line doesn't exist anymore. It exists for this brotherhood. Does it? Because Dex was this brotherhood. He wore the same patch, rode the same roads, and he sold 20 girls into a machine that grinds them into nothing. The line didn't protect them. The code didn't protect them. The only thing that protects anyone is someone willing to get their hands dirty when the clean way is too slow. Rooster looked at the trailer. Through the cracked window, Nora and Eli were visible on the couch. Two silhouettes pressed together, holding on to each other in a room full of strangers who had just torn their world open. He looked back at Mason. If we do this, if we ride to that ranch, say, and something goes wrong, the feds will bury us. Obstruction. Interference. Maybe worse. The Iron Veils become a criminal organization in every database that matters. Everything we've built, every man who rides with this patch, it's over. And if we don't do this and those girls die tonight? Rooster didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the answer was in his face, in the way his jaw unclenched and his shoulders dropped a quarter inch, and his hand finally stopped rolling the unlit cigarette. The answer was in the slow, devastated exhale of a man who had spent 61 years trying to hold the line and had just watched it collapse from the inside. He lit the cigarette, inhaled once, exhaled smoke into the rain. Jenks, he said into his phone, leave 2 men with the girl and her brother. Everybody else rallies at the junction of County Road 9 and the 71 southbound. We're riding to Neosho. Copy. What's the play? Rooster looked at Mason. Mason looked back. and between them passed something that was not forgiveness and not absolution, but something harder and more honest. An acknowledgement that the world they thought they understood had been replaced by something uglier, and the only map they had left was the willingness to keep moving into the dark. "We do what bikers do," Rooster said into the phone. "We ride until somebody stops us." He pocketed the phone. They moved fast. Mackie and a rider named Trask stayed with Nora and Eli inside the trailer. Jenks coordinated the convoy. Coyle and Brennan pulled their roadblocks and fell into formation. The remaining 8 riders mounted up in the rain, engines growling back to life, headlights still dark. Mason stopped at the tree line before climbing onto his Harley. Eli was standing in the trailer doorway. The boy's face was streaked with rain and something else. The particular expression of a child watching the adults around him move toward danger and understanding, for the first time, that the note he'd written in pencil on lined paper had set a machine in motion that couldn't be stopped. "You'll come back?" Eli said. Mason looked at him and lied. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come back." He climbed onto the Road King. The engine kicked. The vibration moved through his body like a second pulse. Rooster pulled alongside him. "Neosho's 45 minutes south," the old man said. "If the quiet man already called Castor, we'll be riding into a site that's either abandoned or armed." "I know. And you're good with that." "I was good with it the second I read the note." Rooster didn't smile, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of the thing that had drawn Mason into the Iron Vales 2 decades ago. Not warmth, not kindness. Recognition. The acknowledgement that some men are built for exactly this kind of night, and the only mercy the world offers them is a road to ride and a reason to ride it. The convoy moved south, 8 motorcycles in a staggered column, cutting through the flooded darkness of the Missouri backcountry like a blade through black water. No headlights, no sirens, just the rumble of engines and the hiss of rain on leather and the distant fading glow of Black Hollow disappearing behind them. Mason rode point. His mind should have been on the road, on the turns, on the gravel shoulders and flooded patches, and the deer that like to stand in the center of unlit highways at night like suicidal ghosts. But his mind was on Dex Harmon. Dex, who had once pulled him out of a ditch at 3 a.m. on a frozen highway in Kansas and driven him to a hospital without being asked. Dex, who had taught him how to rebuild a shovelhead transmission in a parking lot with a flashlight and a stolen socket wrench. Dex, who had held his shoulder at Lily's memorial and said nothing because nothing was all there was. And Dex, who had sold the corridors that moved girls like cargo. 20 girls, over 3 years. How many of them were Lily's age? How many of them had fathers somewhere? Locked up, checked out, dead, gone. Who would never know what happened? How many of them were lying in fields like the one outside Amarillo, unmarked, unnamed, their last moments spent in the back of a truck on a route that a man Mason had loved like a brother had drawn on a map and traded for cash? The rain blurred his vision. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and gripped the handlebars tighter. 30 minutes south of Black Hollow, Jenks's voice crackled through the Bluetooth mounted inside Mason's helmet. "Creed, I've got a vehicle ahead, half a mile. Parked on the shoulder, lights off." Mason slowed. The convoy slowed behind him. He scanned the road ahead. Darkness. Rain. Then, barely visible against the tree line, the outline of a vehicle. Large, boxy, not a car. A truck. A commercial rig? Maybe a box truck, sitting on the shoulder of a 2-lane road that had no business hosting commercial traffic at 1 a.m. "Pull over," Mason said. The convoy stopped. Mason dismounted and walked forward alone. His boots sank into gravel and mud. Rain ran down his face and into his collar. His hand rested instinctively on the heavy flashlight he carried on his belt. Not a weapon, technically, but a 2-pound steel tube that became 1 faster than anything else he carried. The truck was a 24-foot box truck. White. No markings, no company logos. The cab was dark. The engine was off. But the rear cargo door was open about 6 inches. A thin black gap between the door and the frame, and something was making the door vibrate. A low rhythmic thumping. Not mechanical. Human. Someone was kicking the inside of that door. Mason's blood went cold. then hot, then something beyond temperature. He reached the rear of the truck and wrapped his hand around the door handle. The thumping stopped. Silence. Then a voice from inside. Small, hoarse, destroyed. Please, please open it. Please. A girl's voice. Mason ripped the door upward. The cargo space opened before him, and the flashlight beam cut through the darkness and illuminated a sight that would live behind his eyelids for the rest of his life. Two girls, sitting on the metal floor with their backs against the wall. Their wrists were bound in front of them with zip ties, their ankles taped, their mouths marked with adhesive residue where tape had recently been removed, probably pulled off by their own teeth during the drive. They were young. One was maybe 15, dark hair, brown skin, wearing a high school volleyball t-shirt that was torn at the collar. The other was younger, 13 maybe, blonde, freckled, still wearing pajama bottoms and slippers as if she'd been pulled from her bed. Rogers and Neosho. The first two names on the list. Not at the ranch, not yet. Still in transit. The schedule disrupted, the route interrupted, the truck abandoned on the shoulder when whoever was driving received a phone call. From the quiet man, from Castor, from someone, telling them the operation was blown and to run. The driver had run. Left the truck. Left the girls. Like cargo. The 15-year-old looked at Mason, at the leather, the scars, the beard, the flashlight, and pulled the younger girl behind her. "Don't touch us," she said. Her voice was wrecked but steady, the voice of someone who had already survived things that most adults couldn't name. Mason lowered the flashlight. He crouched down. He kept his hands visible. "My name is Mason," he said. "I'm not part of this. I'm here to get you out." That's what the last one said. The words hit Mason in the chest like a bullet that didn't exit. He stayed crouching. He didn't move closer. He let the rain fall on his back and the silent stretch until the girl's breathing slowed enough to see that his hands weren't reaching for her. Rooster appeared beside him. Then Jenks, then Coyle. One by one, bikers materialized at the back of the truck. Scarred, rain-soaked, exhausted men in leather cuts who looked at those two girls on the metal floor and went silent in a way that had nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with the specific kind of grief that doesn't make a sound. Jenks climbed into the truck slowly. He held up a knife, blade down, non-threatening, and pointed at the zip ties. "May I?" he said. The 15-year-old stared at his prosthetic hand, then at his face. She nodded. He cut the ties. The younger girl started crying the moment her hands were free. Not the explosive, dramatic crying of movies. The slow, leaking, exhausted crying of a child whose terror has been so constant that relief feels almost as unbearable. Mason stepped back. He leaned against the side of the truck and pressed his forehead against the wet metal and breathed. 4 girls tonight. Nora in the trailer. These 2 in the truck. And somewhere in Tahlequah, a 12-year-old whose name was on a list that was now being burned or buried. He pulled out his phone and called Sinclair. "We found them," he said. But the 2 from the list, Rogers and Neosho, alive, in a box truck on the highway 30 miles south of Black Hollow. Silence on the line. Then Sinclair's voice, stripped of professionalism, stripped of everything except the thing underneath. "How are they?" "Breathing. I'm rerouting my team. We'll have ambulances and forensic units there within the hour. Creed, do not go to that ranch. Do you hear me? Do not approach the Castor property. We're building a warrant right now, and if you..." The driver abandoned the truck. He's on foot somewhere in these woods. Your 2 witnesses are sitting in the rain because someone tipped Castor off, and the whole network is collapsing. If you wait for a warrant, that ranch will be empty by morning. I understand the urgency. You understand paperwork. I understand what happens to girls in the back of trucks. He hung up. Rooster was watching him. "She said don't go," Mason said. "I heard. The ranch is 15 miles south, Castor's cleaning house right now. If there's evidence, girls, anything, it'll be gone by dawn." Rooster dropped his cigarette into a puddle. The ember hissed and died. "I've been a biker for 40 years, the old man said. "I've broken laws I'm not proud of and kept rules that cost me things I loved. And every single day I've told myself that what separates us from the animals isn't the leather or the chrome or the patch. It's the fact that we choose. We decide what kind of men we are. Every ride. Every time. He looked at the truck, at the two girls being wrapped in dry jackets by bikers who had daughters their age at home. Dex made his choice, Castor made his, the sheriff made his. He looked at Mason. I'm making mine. He pulled his phone and dialed. Mackie, how's the girl? Sleeping, the boy too. Keep them safe. We're not coming back tonight. He hung up and walked to his motorcycle. 8 engines fired in the rain. The convoy turned south toward Neosho, toward a ranch that might be empty or might be a fortress, toward a confrontation that would either save lives or end them. And Mason Creed, a man who had spent 6 years running from a grave he couldn't find, finally stopped running. Because the grave wasn't behind him anymore. It was ahead, and this time he was going to reach it before anyone else was put inside. The road south of Black Hollow dissolved into nothing. No streetlights, no reflectors, no painted lines. Just black asphalt bleeding into blacker shoulders, bleeding into the absolute void of Missouri backcountry at 1:30 in the morning during the worst rainstorm the region had seen in 11 years. The convoy moved through it like a fist punching through dark water. 8 motorcycles in tight formation, headlights still off, navigating by memory and instinct, and the occasional blue-white flash of lightning that turned the landscape into a photograph for half a second before swallowing it again. Mason rode point. His hands were numb on the grips. His clothes were soaked through to the skin, and the wind chill at 60 miles per hour had dropped his core temperature to the point where his jaw had locked into a permanent clench, and his shoulders had become a single rigid plank of tension between his neck and his spine. None of it mattered. His body had become an instrument of forward motion, stripped of comfort, stripped of self-preservation, stripped of everything except the mechanical fact of movement toward a destination that might kill him. 15 miles to the Castor Ranch. 14. 13. Jenks's voice came through the Bluetooth, clipped and precise, the cadence of a man defaulting to military comms protocol because civilian language wasn't built for what they were riding into. Junction ahead. Right fork takes us to the 71 south. Left fork is a county maintenance road. Runs parallel to the highway for about 3 miles before curving west toward open farmland. Which way to the ranch? Mason asked. Ranch is west, set back about half a mile from the nearest paved road, accessed by a private drive that runs through cattle land. The maintenance road puts us on the north side, the tree line. Blind approach. Same play as the trailer. Except this isn't a single wide with a drunk uncle. If Castor runs a distribution hub, he's got security, cameras, maybe dogs. Definitely guns. Noted. Just making sure you're hearing me, Creed. I hear everything. I'm just not stopping. Rooster's voice cut in from 4 bikes back. Jenks, what's the terrain like around the property? Open pasture on 3 sides, fenced. The north tree line is the only cover. Beyond the tree line, there's a gravel drive leading to a main structure. So it looks like a farmhouse on satellite, but the footprint's too big. Could be a modified barn or warehouse. 2 outbuildings east of the main structure, and a pole barn or equipment shed to the west. Vehicles? Last satellite pass was months old, but Dex said this is the processing center. If they're shutting down tonight, there'll be vehicles, trucks. Maybe the same kind of box truck we found. Or nothing, Rooster said. If Castor's smart and the quiet man reached him an hour ago, the place could be swept clean. Well, then we'll know, Mason said. Either way, we'll know. The convoy hit the county maintenance road and dropped speed. Gravel replaced asphalt. The tires crunched and slipped in mud that was more liquid than solid. They rode in single file now, engines barely above idle, the sound partially masked by the storm. The tree line appeared ahead as a ragged wall of black shapes. Oaks, elms, scrub growth thick enough to hide an army or swallow one. They stopped at the edge. Engines off. Silence. Not true silence. The rain was still hammering. The trees were creaking. And somewhere in the distance a coyote was making the kind of sound that could be mistaken for a child crying if you didn't know better. But the human silence was total. 8 men standing in mud beside their motorcycles, breathing, listening, waiting. Mason dismounted and moved to the tree line on foot. His boots sank ankle-deep with every step. He reached the edge of the trees and looked through. Lightning flashed. The ranch materialized for one frozen second. It was bigger than he'd expected. The main structure wasn't a farmhouse. It was a repurposed agricultural building, long and low, with a metal roof and concrete block walls that had been painted to look residential from the road. A wraparound porch had been added, and shuttered windows lined the front, giving it the appearance of a country estate to anyone driving past at highway speed. But the proportions were wrong. The building was too deep, too wide, designed for function, not habitation. Two outbuildings to the east, smaller prefab metal structures, the kind used for equipment storage or livestock management. A pole barn to the west, open on one side, sheltering what looked like two vehicles under its roof. And in the gravel drive between the main building and the road, 3 trucks were parked in a row, engines running, headlights off, people moving between them. Mason counted figures in the next lightning flash. 4, maybe 5, moving with urgency, carrying boxes, loading something into the trucks, their movements choppy and rushed, not the organized efficiency of a planned departure, the frantic scramble of people destroying evidence. He went back to the convoy. "They're cleaning," he told Rooster. 3 trucks, 4 or 5 people, loading and moving. Armed? Can't tell from this distance, but if you were running a trafficking hub in the middle of cattle country and someone just blew up your operation, would you be unarmed? Rooster didn't answer the question. He turned to the group. In the darkness, the bikers were shapes, leather, and rain, and the faint glow of a phone screen that Jenks was using to pull up a satellite image of the property. "Listen up," Rooster said. His voice was low, steady, carrying just enough to reach every man without projecting past the tree line. "We don't know what's in that building. We don't know how many people are inside. We don't know if there are girls still on the property or if they've already been moved. What we do know is that every minute we stand here is a minute they're using to erase what happened." He paused. "I'm not ordering anyone to do this. What we're about to do is not club business. It's not sanctioned. It's not covered. If it goes wrong, the feds will treat us like criminals and the courts will agree. Every man here has the right to walk back to his bike and ride home, and no one, including me, will hold it against him." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The rain fell. Rooster nodded once. "Jenks, take Coyle and Brennan. Circle east through the pasture to the outbuildings. Stay low. Stay dark. If those buildings have girls inside, you get them out. If they're empty, hold position and cut off the east escape route." Jenks nodded and moved. "Devlin, Riggs, you're on the pole barn. Those vehicles under the roof don't leave. Slash tires, pull wires, I don't care. Those trucks in the drive don't leave either. If anyone tries to run, you stop them. Not with fists, with Harleys. Block the drive." 2 more bikers peeled off into the dark. "Mason," Rooster looked at him. "You and I take the front door. Just us?" "Bishop backs us up." Rooster nodded toward the last biker in the group, a massive, quiet black man in his early 50s who hadn't said a word all night. Bishop had hands the size of dinner plates and a stillness about him that was more unsettling than any threat. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and come home with a Bronze Star, a shattered left knee, and a silence so deep it felt geological. He communicated in nods and movement, and when Bishop moved toward something, it stayed down. "Front door," Mason said. "That's it?" "We're not an assault team. We're a disruption. We walk in, we make noise, we make it impossible for them to keep loading, and we hold the scene until Sinclair arrives. And if they shoot..." Rooster pulled something from inside his cut. A snub-nosed .38 revolver, small and ugly, the kind of gun that exists not for sport or display, but for the singular purpose of ending a threat at close range. "I've carried this since 1983, he said. "Never fired it outside a range. I'd like to keep that record. But you won't lose sleep if you don't." "Not tonight." They moved. Mason, Rooster, and Gay and Bishop crossed the open ground between the tree line and the ranch in a low crouch, using the parked trucks as cover. The rain was their ally now. It masked their footsteps, blurred their shapes, and covered the sound of their breathing with a relentless static that turned the entire world into white noise. They reached the first truck, a heavy-duty pickup with an extended bed. The tailgate was down and Mason could see boxes stacked inside, file boxes, the kind you buy at office supply stores stuffed with papers and folders, financial records, operational documents. The paper trail of an enterprise being dismantled in real time. The second truck was a panel van. Its side door was open and Mason could see inside. Mattresses. 4 of them stacked flat on the floor with no sheets, no pillows, just bare mattresses with stains that looked black in the darkness. His stomach turned. The third truck was another box truck, similar to the one they'd found on the highway. Its rear door was closed, padlocked. Mason pressed his ear against the metal. Nothing. He moved on. They reached the front porch. The wraparound structure creaked under their weight despite their efforts to move silently. The front door was heavy, reinforced, not residential, with a deadbolt that gleamed new against the weathered wood frame. Voices inside. Multiple. Male. Tense. The kind of voices that belong to men operating under time pressure, their words clipped and overlapping. Told you to shred everything in the office. Not just the files on the desk. Trucks need to be gone in 20 minutes, Lyle. I'm not... Does it matter now? The whole thing is... Shut up and load. Questions later. Load now. Lyle. Mason filed the name. Rooster held up 3 fingers, counted down. 3, 2, 1. Bishop hit the door. Not kicked. Hit. With his shoulder all 260 pounds of him behind it, the deadbolt ripping through the frame like the wood was wet cardboard. The door exploded inward and Bishop was through it before it finished swinging, and Mason was behind him, and Rooster was behind Mason, and the interior of Lyle Castor's processing center opened up before them like the inside of an abattoir. The main room was large, far larger than the porch suggested. The walls were unpainted concrete block. The floor was poured concrete, cracked and stained. Fluorescent lights hung from exposed ceiling joists, buzzing and flickering, casting the kind of light that made everything look sick. Along the left wall, a row of folding tables held computers, monitors, printers, all in the process of being disconnected and boxed. Along the right wall, filing cabinets stood open, their drawers pulled out, paper scattered across the floor like dead leaves. And in the center of the room, 5 men stopped moving. One was on his knees stuffing papers into a garbage bag. Another was disconnecting a computer tower, cables trailing from his hands like severed veins. A third stood near a hallway entrance holding a shotgun loosely at his side. Not aimed, not ready, but present. The fourth was younger, panicked, holding a gas can, his eyes wide. And the fifth, standing behind a desk at the far end of the room with a phone pressed to his ear and an expression of furious, controlled calm, was Lyle Castor. He was not what Mason expected. 60 maybe, trim, silver hair combed back, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He wore a pressed flannel shirt tucked into clean jeans and boots that had been polished recently enough to catch the fluorescent light. He looked like a retired professor, a community board chairman. The kind of man you'd see at a county fair shaking hands with the mayor, his smile practiced and his handshake firm, and his entire existence calibrated to project trustworthiness. He lowered the phone. "You're not law enforcement," he said. Not a question, an assessment. His eyes had moved across their leather cuts, their scars, the absence of badges or vests or anything that carried institutional authority, and arrived at a conclusion so fast it was nearly instantaneous. "No," Rooster said. "We're not." "Then you're trespassing on private property, and you have about 30 seconds to leave before I exercise my right to defend my home." "Your home?" Mason looked around the room. The industrial lighting, the concrete floor, the filing cabinets, the computer equipment. Cozy. "I run an agricultural consulting business. This is my office." "Agricultural consulting." Mason pointed at the man with the gas can. "Is that why your boy's about to burn the place down?" The man with the gas can took a step back. Castor's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A recalculation, a shifting of gears, the adjustment of a man who had spent decades managing crises and understood that the first rule of damage control is never losing composure in front of people who are trying to take it from you. "I don't know who you are or what you think you found," Castor said, "but I assure you—" "We found a box truck on the highway with 2 girls in the back," Mason said. 15 and 13, bound, gagged, abandoned on the shoulder by a driver who got a phone call telling him to run. We found a list in an SUV outside a trailer in Black Hollow with 4 names on it. 2 crossed off, 2 still active. And we found a man who gave us your name, your address, and a detailed description of what you do to children in this building. The room went still. The man with the shotgun shifted his grip. Bishop took 1 step toward him. Just 1. But it was the kind of step that communicated, with absolute clarity, that the next step would be the last one the man with the shotgun would experience standing upright. The shotgun stayed at his side. Castor's composure cracked for exactly 1 second. A micro-expression, a tightening around the mouth, a flicker of something in his eyes that was not fear but fury. The fury of a man whose carefully constructed fortress of deniability has just been breached by people who don't respect the rules of the game he's been winning for years. "Dex," he said quietly. "Dex," Mason confirmed. "Dex Harmon is a drug addict and a liar who was terminated from my consulting work 2 years ago for stealing. Anything he told you is, save it for the feds. They're about 30 minutes behind us." That landed. Castor's jaw tightened. His eyes went to the hallway behind him, a narrow corridor that led deeper into the building, past the main room, into whatever lay beyond the concrete walls. "There's nothing here," Castor said. "You can search if you want. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." "Then you won't mind us looking." "I mind the trespassing. I mind the property damage. And I mind the implication." "We're past implications." Mason took a step forward. "We're at facts. And the fact is that you have about 25 minutes to tell me whether there's anyone else in this building before this becomes a federal crime scene, and the only story that matters is the one you told first." Castor stared at him. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Rain hammered the metal roof. And from somewhere behind the hallway, distant, muffled, barely audible beneath the storm and the static and the humming lights, a sound. Knocking. Rhythmic. Desperate. The same kind of knocking Mason had heard 30 minutes ago on the side of a box truck on a dark highway. Someone was inside this building, behind a locked door. Knocking. Mason's entire body went rigid. He looked at Castor. Castor looked back. And in the rancher's eyes, Mason saw the final truth. The thing beneath the composure, beneath the flannel shirt and the reading glasses and the practiced smile. He saw the absolute bottomless emptiness of a man who had looked at children and seen product, who had built spreadsheets and logistics chains and delivery schedules around human lives and slept soundly because the money was good and the system worked and nobody who mattered had ever knocked on his door. Until tonight. "Bishop," Mason said. The big man moved. He crossed the room toward the hallway with a speed that contradicted his size, his boots hammering the concrete, his shadow stretching across the walls like something primordial. The man with the shotgun finally raised it, an instinctive panicked motion, Rooster's .38 cleared leather. "Put it down." The voice was not loud. Did not need to be. It carried the specific gravity of a man who had spent 40 years making exactly one promise, that he would not fire this weapon, and was now standing on the edge of breaking it. The shotgun hit the floor. Bishop reached the hallway and disappeared into it. Mason followed. The corridor was narrow, dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from a wire. The walls were the same concrete block as the main room, but here they were damp, condensation or seepage. The air heavy with moisture and a chemical smell that Mason couldn't immediately identify. Bleach. Industrial cleaning solution. The smell of someone trying to erase biological evidence. 3 doors lined the hallway. The first was open. A bathroom, small, filthy, with a drain in the center of the floor that had no business being in a residential bathroom. The second was locked from the outside with a sliding bolt. The knocking was coming from the third door. Mason slid the bolt on the second door and opened it. Empty. A room with a mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and a window that had been boarded shut from the outside. The mattress had no sheets. The walls had scratches on them. Low, at the height a child could reach. Lines and marks, and what might have been letters carved into the concrete with a fingernail or a piece of wire. Mason's throat closed. He moved to the third door. The knocking intensified. The door was locked with a padlock. Heavy, new, the same brand as the one on Nora's bedroom door. Mason looked at Bishop. The big man grabbed the padlock and wrenched it. The hasp tore free from the wooden doorframe with a screech of metal and the sound of splitting wood, and the door swung open. Inside was a girl. Not a girl. A child. Small, dark-haired, wrapped in a blanket that was too thin for the temperature of the room. She was sitting in the corner with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes wide and her mouth open in a silent scream that hadn't become sound yet, because she didn't know if the men coming through the door were rescuers or the next rotation of her captors. She was young, very young, and she was not alone. Behind her, wedged into the far corner of the room, was another figure, a woman, mid-20s, emaciated. Her hair was matted and her clothes were torn, and her left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage that was soaked through with something dark. She was holding the girl behind her, shielding her with her own body, and staring at Mason and Bishop with the feral, calculated aggression of a mother animal prepared to fight to the death. "Stay back," the woman said. Her voice was raw, shredded. The voice of someone who had been screaming and had run out of scream. "We're not with them," Mason said. "I said stay back." Bishop stopped moving. Mason stopped. They stood in the doorway, two massive men in leather cuts, rain dripping from their sleeves onto the concrete floor, and they did not move. They did not reach. They did not speak again. They waited. The woman studied them. Her eyes, dark, sunken, intelligent, moved across their faces, their patches, their hands. She was calculating, assessing, running a threat analysis honed by months or years of captivity, where reading a man's intentions correctly was the difference between surviving another day and not. "Who sent you?" she said. "Nobody sent us. A boy in a diner slipped me a note. We followed the trail. It led here." "A boy?" 10 years old, his sister was on a list. Something changed in the woman's face. A fracture in the armor. A memory surfacing. "Nora," she whispered. Mason's blood stopped. "You know Nora Mercer?" "She was here 3 days ago. They brought her in for processing. Then they moved her to a trailer up north for the handoff." The woman's voice shook. "I told her to fight. I told her not to get in the truck. But she was so scared. She was just a kid." "She's safe. We got her out." The fracture widened. The woman's jaw trembled. Her grip on the girl behind her loosened, not releasing, but softening, as if the information had unlocked some internal mechanism that had been holding her rigid for longer than the human body was designed to sustain. "How many are here?" Mason asked. "Just us now. There were 4 others last week. They moved them south. I don't know where." "What's your name?" The woman closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. Not crying. Leaking. The slow, involuntary release of someone who had been dehydrated by fear for so long that tears had become a physical impossibility until this exact moment. "Dana," she said. "Dana Lee? How long have you been here, Dana?" 7 months. 7 months. Mason did the math in his head and felt something inside him buckle. 7 months in a concrete room with a bucket and a boarded window and a padlock on the door. 7 months of whatever had been done to her in this building. 7 months while the world outside went on buying groceries and watching television and complaining about gas prices and never once looking closely enough at the quiet ranch south of Neosho to wonder what was happening behind its freshly painted walls. "We're getting you out," Mason said. "Both of you, right now." He stepped forward slowly and extended his hand. Dana looked at it. The girl behind her looked at it. And then Dana Lee, who had survived 7 months in a room that smelled like bleach and fear, reached out and took it. Her hand was thin, cold. The bones felt fragile beneath the skin, like holding a bird. Mason pulled her gently to her feet, and Bishop crouched down and opened his arms to the girl in the corner, and the child, after a long, trembling pause, crawled forward and let him pick her up. She weighed nothing. She clung to Bishop's neck with both arms and buried her face in his leather cut, and the big man, who hadn't spoken a word all night, who communicated in nods and movement and the particular silence of a man who had seen too much to trust language anymore, closed his eyes and held her. They moved back through the hallway toward the main room. Rooster had the situation controlled. The 5 men were on the floor, face down, hands behind their heads. The man with the gas can sobbing quietly, the one who'd held the shotgun bleeding from a cut above his eye where he'd evidently made a second attempt at resistance and discovered what Rooster's boot heel felt like against a forehead. Castor was still standing, still composed, still wearing the expression of a man who believed his lawyer would fix everything. Then he saw Donna and the child, and the expression crumbled, not into guilt, not into remorse, into rage. The incandescent, narcissistic rage of a man watching his empire collapse, not because he'd been caught, but because the people he'd caged had survived long enough to prove what he'd done. "That woman is mentally ill," Castor said. "She came here voluntarily. I was providing shelter." Dana walked straight to him. She was 6 inches shorter and 80 pounds lighter, and she looked like a strong wind could collapse her. She stood in front of Lyle Castor and looked up at him with 7 months of concrete walls behind her eyes. "I know where the records are," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, terrifyingly calm. "Not the ones you're burning, the real ones. The ones on the server in the cellar beneath the pole barn. The ones with names and dates and buyer contacts going back 5 years. You didn't know I could hear you through the walls, but sound travels through concrete, and I have a very good memory." Castor's composure didn't just crack, it shattered. He lunged, not toward the door, not toward a weapon, toward Dana, his hands reaching for her throat, his body driven by the pure reptilian impulse to silence the witness, to destroy the testimony, to eliminate the only person in the room who could take his carefully partitioned world and tear it open from the inside. Mason caught him. His fist connected with Castor's jaw with a sound like a branch breaking, and the rancher spun sideways and hit the desk and went down hard, his reading glasses flying off the chain and shattering on the concrete floor. Mason was on him instantly, knee on his chest, hand on his collar, breathing hard, his vision narrowing to a single point of focus that was Lyle Castor's face and the truth of what that face represented. 20 girls, maybe more, over 5 years. Moved through corridors and loaded into trucks, and processed in rooms with padlocks and buckets and mattresses with no sheets. Girls like Lily, girls like Nora, girls like the child Bishop was carrying right now, her face buried in leather, her body shaking with the aftershocks of a terror she didn't have words for. Mason's fist rose. Every ounce of grief he'd carried for 6 years, every sleepless night, every mile of empty highway. Every morning he woke up and remembered his daughter was in a field outside Amarillo. Channeled itself into his right arm and pulled it back for a blow that would not be a punch, but a verdict. Rooster's hand caught his wrist. "Not like this." Mason's arm trembled. Every muscle in his body was screaming to finish it, to deliver the sentence that no courtroom would ever deliver with sufficient force. To take from Castor the same thing Castor had taken from every girl who'd passed through this building. The illusion that the world was a place where monsters faced consequences. "He goes to prison," Rooster said. "He stands in a courtroom. He hears a judge say his name. He sits in a cell for the rest of his life knowing that a biker and a 10-year-old boy and a woman who listened through concrete walls brought it all down. That's worse than anything your fist can do. You know it is." Mason's breath came in ragged pulls. His fist hovered. Castor's eyes were wide beneath him, not with fear, but with the dawning recognition that the power dynamic he'd relied on for years had inverted completely, and the man kneeling on his chest was deciding his fate with a clenched hand and a choice. Mason lowered his fist. He released Castor's collar. He stood up, and as he did, the sound of tires on gravel reached through the rain. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, approaching from the main road. Headlights swept the property. Blue and red lights strobed through the windows. Sinclair's team. Mason looked at Dana, standing in the center of the room with her arms wrapped around herself, thin and broken and alive. He looked at Bishop, holding a child who had stopped shaking. He looked at Rooster, who stood with his 38 still in his hand and 40 years of brotherhood written across his face, waiting to hand this scene over to people with badges and warrants and the kind of authority that the world respected. Then Mason walked outside into the rain. The FBI vehicles were pulling into the drive, black SUVs, unmarked sedans, an ambulance behind them. Agents in tactical gear poured out into the storm. A woman in a dark jacket with FBI printed on the back was striding toward the building with the focused urgency of someone who had been driving 90 miles an hour for the last 45 minutes. Tara Sinclair. She saw Mason on the porch. "How many inside?" she said. 5 men, including Castor, 2 survivors, a woman and a girl. There's a server in a cellar under the pole barn. Financial records. Buyer contacts. 5 years of evidence. Sinclair stopped walking. She stared at him. The rain ran down her face and her eyes held a mixture of professional fury and something else. Something that looked, for just a moment, like gratitude she couldn't afford to express. "You contaminated my crime scene," she said. "Your crime scene was being doused with gasoline when we walked in." She stared at him for 3 more seconds. Then she moved past him into the building, barking orders, her team flowing in behind her like water through a broken dam. Mason stayed on the porch. His hands were shaking. His knuckles were bleeding. Castor's jaw had split the skin over his right hand, and rain was washing the blood down his fingers in thin pink streams. His entire body felt like it was shutting down, system by system. Adrenaline burning off, muscles releasing, the iron architecture of rage and purpose that had held him upright for the last 4 hours finally beginning to corrode. He sat down on the porch steps. The rain hit his face, and from his pocket, his phone buzzed. A text from Mackie, back at the trailer in Black Hollow. "Creed, problem." Then a second text. "Someone came for the kids." Then a third. "Eli is gone." Mason was on his Harley before the third text finished loading. He didn't tell Rooster, didn't tell Sinclair, didn't tell anyone. He crossed the gravel drive at a dead sprint, swung his leg over the Road King, kicked the engine alive, and tore out of the Castor Ranch like a man outrunning his own skeleton. The FBI vehicles scattered gravel behind him. An agent shouted something that was swallowed by the storm. None of it registered. His mind had collapsed into a single corridor. Narrow, dark, absolute, with Eli Mercer standing at the end of it, and the words, "Someone came for the kids," burning through his skull like a brand. He called Mackie while riding one-handed through flooded darkness at 70 miles per hour. "Talk." Mackie's voice was strained, winded. "Vehicle showed up 20 minutes ago. Black sedan, 2 men. They came in through the back of the trailer park on foot. Trask saw them first. He went out to intercept, and they dropped him." "Dropped him how?" "Taser. He's conscious. He's okay." But by the time I got outside, one of them had Eli. They grabbed him through the bedroom window. "Nora's still here." "She's inside. She's safe. I barricaded the front door. But Eli's gone, Creed. They took him, and they drove east." "East toward what?" "I don't know. The highway, maybe. The 44. "How long ago?" 15 minutes. Maybe 18. 18 minutes. At highway speed, that was 25 miles of distance. 25 miles of darkness between Mason and a 10-year-old boy who had done the bravest thing anyone in Black Hollow had done in years and was now paying for it. Mason's throttle hand twisted until the engine screamed. Description of the vehicle: black sedan, newer model, tinted windows, Missouri plates, but I couldn't get the number in the dark. The men. One was big, heavy build, contractor jacket, the contractor from the diner. The other? Mackie paused. Serpent tattoo, neck. Mason's jaw locked so tight he felt a molar crack. They'd circled back. After fleeing Ruby's Junction, after the quiet man made his calls, after the operation began its collapse, the contractor and the serpent-tattooed man hadn't run. They'd come back, not for Nora, not for evidence, for Eli, the boy who'd started it all, the witness, the one loose end that could testify to everything: the diner, the note, the men at the table, the deal with Wade, the entire chain of events that connected a backwoods uncle to a 4-state trafficking network. They weren't running, they were cleaning. Mason rode east. The storm was finally breaking. The rain had thinned to a cold mist, and patches of sky were appearing between the clouds. Dark blue, starless, the dead hours between midnight and dawn, when the world belongs to the people who operate in the spaces that daylight never touches. The highway stretched ahead, empty and black, and Mason pushed the Road King past 80, past 90, the wind tearing at his soaked clothes and the engine vibrating through his bones with a frequency that felt like controlled fury. His phone rang. Rooster. Where are you? Highway 44 eastbound. They took Eli. Silence. Then, I'm 15 minutes behind you. Jenks and Coyle are with me. Sinclair's been notified. She's dispatching units to the highway. They won't get here in time. Then you slow down and wait for us. No. Creed, listen to me. You are one man on a motorcycle chasing two armed men in a vehicle. This is not the trailer. This is not the ranch. This is a moving target on an open highway, and if you catch them alone, then I catch them alone. You'll get killed, maybe. And that helps the boy how? Mason didn't answer, because the answer was ugly and honest and lived in the same part of his brain where Lily's name was carved. The part that understood, with a clarity that bypassed logic entirely, that he would rather die trying to reach Eli than survive knowing he hadn't. He'd already been that survivor once. 6 years of it. 6 years of coffee going cold and roads going nowhere, and a name tattooed on his arm that had become less a memorial and more an indictment. He couldn't do it again. The human architecture wasn't built for it. There was a limit to how many children a man could fail before the word man stopped applying. I'm not slowing down, Mason said. Rooster exhaled. A long, ragged sound. The sound of a man releasing his grip on an argument he knew he'd already lost. I'll track your phone. Stay on the line. Mason kept writing. 7 minutes later, he saw it. Taillights. Faint red dots on the highway a half-mile ahead, moving fast but not recklessly. The speed of someone trying to blend into sparse late-night traffic rather than attract attention. A dark sedan. Newer model. Mason killed his headlight. He closed the gap in darkness, riding by feel and the faint glow of the sedan's taillights, dropping his speed to match theirs at just over 70. At a quarter mile, he could make out the shape of the vehicle. A late-model Dodge Charger, black or dark gray, the kind of car that looked like an undercover police vehicle and was chosen for exactly that reason. He needed them to stop. On the highway, at speed, with a child inside, he couldn't force anything. A collision would kill Eli. A pursuit would trigger a chase that could end in a wreck. He needed them off the road, on foot, in a situation where the boy could be separated from the men. He needed leverage. His phone buzzed. A text from Jenks. Rest stop 6 miles ahead, eastbound. Closed for construction, but the lot is accessible. Mason calculated. If he could get ahead of the sedan and reach the rest stop first, he could set up, block the entrance, force a confrontation on his terms, but getting ahead meant passing them, and passing them meant being seen. He looked at the road. The highway was climbing a long, gradual hill, the kind of terrain feature that hides what's on the other side. If he accelerated now, used the hill as cover, he could crest before them and gain the distance. He twisted the throttle. The Road King surged. 90, 95. The engine howled and the wind became a solid force against his chest, and the mist turned into needles against his face. He passed the sedan on the left at 102 miles per hour, a black shape in the darkness, gone before anyone inside could register what they'd seen. He crested the hill. The rest stop appeared 2 minutes later, a gravel lot with a shuttered restroom building and construction barriers stacked at the entrance. The lot was empty. The lights were off. A chain across the entrance had been cut and was lying in the mud. Mason pulled in, killed the engine, positioned the Harley sideways across the exit, the only way out of the lot for a vehicle that entered. Then he stood in the dark and waited. 3 minutes. 4. The sedan appeared. It wasn't stopping. It was passing the rest stop at highway speed. Mason's stomach dropped. Then the brake lights flared. The car slowed, pulled onto the shoulder, stopped. A door opened. The contractor stepped out and walked to the edge of the road, unzipping his fly. A bathroom stop. The kind of mundane physical reality that reminds you that even men who kidnap children still need to piss. Mason moved. He crossed the gravel lot, vaulted the construction barrier, and closed the distance between the rest stop and the sedan's shoulder position in a dead sprint. 60 yards, 50, 40. The contractor was facing away, one hand braced against the car, his back to the highway. The serpent-tattooed man was still inside. Eli was still inside. Mason reached the contractor at full speed. He didn't announce himself, didn't warn, didn't hesitate. His right arm hooked around the man's neck from behind and wrenched sideways with a controlled violence that took the contractor off his feet and onto the wet asphalt in one motion. The man's head bounced off the road. His body went limp, not unconscious, but stunned, the neural system scrambled by the impact, limbs twitching without coordination. Mason stomped on his right hand, bones cracked. The contractor screamed into the pavement. The sedan's passenger door flew open. The serpent-tattooed man came out fast, faster than Mason expected, and he was holding a knife. Not the folding knife from the diner, something longer, a fixed blade. The kind of knife carried by a man who had used it before and knew exactly how much pressure it took to open skin. He saw Mason over the roof of the car. He smiled. That same smile from the diner, the one that said amusement, the one that said this was, on some level, entertainment. "There he is," the serpent-tattooed man said. "The old man who doesn't finish his coffee." Mason circled the front of the car. Through the windshield, he could see Eli in the back seat. The boy's hands were zip-tied in front of him. His mouth was taped. His eyes were wide and wet and locked on Mason with an intensity that burned through the glass like a physical force. "Let him go," Mason said. "Can't do that. The boy's the only thing keeping us breathing right now. As long as we have him, your biker friends and the feds stay polite." The serpent-tattooed man adjusted his grip on the knife. "Come to think of it, maybe I should thank the kid. He's been real useful tonight. He's 10 years old enough to make choices, old enough to face what comes from them." Mason's vision tunneled. The highway disappeared. The mist disappeared. The world contracted to a 10-foot radius containing himself, the man with the knife, and a car with a child inside. "Last chance," Mason said. "Walk away. Leave the boy. Disappear. Nobody follows." The serpent-tattooed man laughed, a short, sharp sound. Then he moved. He was fast. Young and fast and trained in the kind of knife work that doesn't come from YouTube videos, but from the specific education of violence that men learn in places where law doesn't reach. The blade came in low, a horizontal slash aimed at Mason's abdomen, and Mason barely got his arm down in time. The knife caught the leather of his cut and sliced through it, nicking the skin beneath but not deep enough to slow him. Mason grabbed the man's knife wrist with both hands. They locked. Two bodies straining against each other on the wet shoulder of a dark highway, boots slipping on asphalt, breath coming in grunts and snarls, the knife trembling between them like a compass needle trying to find north. The serpent-tattooed man was stronger than he looked. Leaner, yes, but wiry in the way that comes from a lifetime of physical confrontation. The kind of strength that isn't built in gyms, but in fights, in cells, in the particular conditioning of a body that has learned to translate desperation into force. He twisted the knife free. The blade came up. Mason caught it with his left hand. The edge sliced across his palm and through the meat of his fingers, and pain detonated up his arm like a lit fuse, and blood, warm, immediate, shockingly abundant, poured from his hand and mixed with the rain on the asphalt. Mason didn't let go. His fingers closed around the blade itself, the edges cutting deeper with every ounce of pressure, and he wrenched the knife sideways with a movement that used his entire body weight as a lever. The serpent-tattooed man's wrist snapped. The sound was distinct, wet, final. He screamed and the knife fell, and Mason drove his forehead into the man's face with the accumulated force of 6 years of grief compacted into a single point of contact. The serpent-tattooed man's nose exploded. His legs gave out. He hit the ground and didn't get up. Mason stood over him, bleeding from his hand, breathing in ragged animal pulls, the world swimming in and out of focus as adrenaline and blood loss competed for control of his nervous system. He turned to the car. Eli was kicking the back door from the inside. Mason opened it. The boy tumbled out onto the highway, hands still zip-tied, tape still over his mouth. Mason pulled the tape off as gently as his bleeding hand could manage. Eli gasped. "You came back," the boy said. "I told you I would." "You were lying." "Yeah," Mason's voice cracked. "I was, but I came back anyway." He cut the zip ties with the fallen knife. His left hand was shaking badly now. The cut was deep, running diagonally across his palm and through 2 fingers, and the blood was pooling in his cupped hand like something he was trying to offer or receive. Eli looked at the blood, looked at Mason's face, and then the boy, who had survived 10 years of invisibility, who had taught himself to trust no one, who had dropped a note on a stranger's boot as a last desperate act of faith in a world that had given him no reason for faith, stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Mason Creed's waist and held on. Mason's good hand came down on the boy's head. He closed his eyes and stood there on the shoulder of Highway 44 in the last of the rain, bleeding and broken and holding a child he'd known for 4 hours, and felt something he hadn't felt since the day they told him Lily was gone. Not redemption. Redemption was a word for people who believed the ledger could be balanced. Purpose. The raw, unbeautiful, unglamorous fact of being needed by someone small enough to need you completely. Headlights appeared on the highway behind them. 3 motorcycles. Rooster, Jenks, Coyle. They pulled onto the shoulder and killed their engines. Rooster dismounted and surveyed the scene. The contractor face down on the asphalt, the serpent-tattooed man unconscious with a shattered wrist and a broken nose, Mason bleeding from a hand wound that was going to need stitches, and Eli standing beside him, unhurt, his small hand gripping the hem of Mason's destroyed leather cut. Rooster looked at all of it. Then he looked at Mason. "You were supposed to wait." "You know me better than that." "Yeah, I do." Rooster pulled a bandana from his vest pocket and tossed it. "Wrap your hand before you bleed out on the highway. The paperwork would be a nightmare." Jenks zip-tied the 2 men while Coyle called Sinclair. Within 10 minutes, the highway was lit up with federal vehicles and ambulances and the organized chaos of law enforcement descending on a scene they'd arrived too late to control but early enough to process. A paramedic wrapped Mason's hand in the back of an ambulance. 16 stitches. He'd severed a tendon in his left ring finger, the same hand, the same finger that was already missing its lower joint. The paramedic made a comment about symmetry that Mason didn't find funny. Eli sat beside him on the ambulance bench. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. 3 months later. Winter settled over Missouri like a held breath. The floods had receded. The fields had dried. The roads that had been rivers in October were now frost-cracked and salt-dusted. The trees stripped bare, the sky a permanent shade of gray that hovered between cloud and ceiling and made the world feel smaller and closer and quieter. Black Hollow looked the same, and didn't. The gas station next to Ruby's Junction had reopened under new ownership. A couple from Rolla who had heard about the town on the news and decided it was the kind of place that deserved a second chance. The county clerk's office had been restructured after Sheriff Darrell Boone was arrested on 27 federal charges including obstruction, accessory to trafficking, and evidence tampering. His mugshot ran in every newspaper in the state. He was photographed being led into a federal courthouse in Springfield wearing an orange jumpsuit and an expression of bottomless self-pity that fooled no one. Lyle Castor's trial was scheduled for spring. Federal prosecutors had seized the server from beneath the pole barn and extracted 5 years of financial records, communications, buyer contacts, and logistical planning documents that mapped a trafficking network spanning Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. 23 victims were identified through the records. 17 were recovered alive, scattered across foster systems and group homes, and the particular bureaucratic limbo that awaits rescued children when the system that failed them is also the system tasked with saving them. 6 were still missing. Their names were published. Their photographs circulated. The search continued. Dana Lee testified before a federal grand jury in November. She spoke for 4 hours. She did not cry. She recounted dates, times, names, and locations with a precision that the lead prosecutor later described as the most devastating testimony he'd heard in 22 years of practice. The girl who had been locked in the room with her, a 12-year-old from Tulsa whose name was withheld from public record, was placed with a specialist foster family and was receiving treatment. Dex Harmon turned himself in to the FBI Springfield office 3 days after the night in Black Hollow. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. No member of the Iron Veils attended the hearing. His name was struck from the chapter roster. His patch was burned in a metal drum behind the clubhouse in a ceremony that involved no words, no speeches, and no ceremony beyond the act itself. The fire lasted 11 seconds. Nobody watched it go out. The Iron Veils were investigated. Federal agents interviewed every member of the Missouri chapter. Rooster cooperated fully, opened the chapter's records, and submitted to 3 separate depositions. In the end, the task force concluded that the Brotherhood had acted as civilian first responders and that their intervention had directly prevented the trafficking of at least 4 additional victims. No charges were filed. Agent Tara Sinclair was quoted in a Springfield newspaper saying, "The Iron Veils did what the system should have done years ago." Rooster cut the article out and pinned it to the wall above the bar at the clubhouse. He never mentioned it again. Nora and Eli Mercer were placed with a foster family outside St. Louis, a retired schoolteacher and her husband, a plumber, who had fostered 11 children over 2 decades and understood that love is not a word you say, but a temperature you maintain in a house until the people inside it stop flinching when doors close. Nora enrolled in school for the first time in a year. She was behind. She struggled. She sat in the back of every classroom and didn't speak for the first 3 weeks. Then a girl in her history class asked to borrow a pencil, and Nora lent it, and the girl said thanks and smiled, and Nora smiled back. It was the first smile her brother had seen in 11 months. Eli was harder, quieter. He had nightmares that woke the house, dreams of locked doors and men in diners, and the sound of a gunshot that hadn't actually hit him, but that his sleeping brain insisted on replaying at full volume every 3rd or 4th night. The foster parents didn't push. They left his bedroom door open, kept a nightlight in the hallway, and made pancakes at 4 in the morning when the screaming started, because sometimes the only thing you can do for a broken child is feed them in the dark and wait. Mason visited every Sunday. He rode down from the Iron Veils clubhouse north of Waynesville, 90 minutes on the highway, winter wind biting through his repaired leather cut, his left hand stiff and aching inside a glove that had to be modified to accommodate the fresh scarring. He brought nothing. No gifts, no toys, no awkward gestures of surrogate fatherhood. He just showed up, sat on the porch with Eli while the boy drank hot chocolate and Mason drank coffee, and they watched the suburban street together in silence. Sometimes they talked. Mostly they didn't, but every Sunday, when the sound of the Harley appeared at the end of the block, Eli would stop whatever he was doing and walk to the front door and wait. And when Mason pulled into the driveway, the boy's face would do something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite relief, but was somewhere in the territory between the two. The expression of someone who had learned that certain promises, made by certain people, could actually hold. Nora spoke to Mason once about it. They were standing in the foster family's kitchen while Eli was in the yard throwing a ball for the neighbor's dog, a fat beagle named Sergeant who had approximately 0 athletic ability but infinite enthusiasm. "He doesn't talk about what happened," Nora said. She was washing dishes. Her hands moved methodically, the motion of someone who had learned to keep their body busy while their mind processed things too large for stillness. "Not to the therapist, not to me, not to anyone." "Does he need to?" "The therapist says he should." "What do you say?" Nora was quiet for a moment. She set a glass on the drying rack with the care of someone handling something fragile. "I say he talks to you, not with words, but he talks to you." Mason looked out the window at Eli. The boy was lying on his back in the dead winter grass while Sergeant licked his face, and he was laughing. A sound so foreign and unexpected that it took Mason a moment to identify it. "I'm not his father," Mason said. "I know. I'm not trying to be." "I know that too." Nora turned off the faucet. "But he chose you, in that diner. Out of everyone in the room, he looked at you and decided you were the one who would help. A 10-year-old's instinct." She looked at Mason. "He was right." Mason didn't answer. His left hand ached. The scar tissue pulled when the temperature dropped, which in a Missouri winter meant it pulled constantly. A permanent physical reminder that he had grabbed a blade with his bare hand to reach a child on a dark highway. He didn't mind the ache. Some pain is the price of admission to a life worth having. The final scene. February. Late afternoon. The sun sat low on the horizon, casting the kind of pale, cold light that turns everything it touches into a watercolor. Soft edges, muted tones, the world looking like a photograph of itself. Ruby's Junction was packed. The diner hadn't seen this many people since the night of the storm, but the energy was different. No fear, no tension, no storm hammering the windows. Instead, the windows were fogged with the warmth of bodies and conversation and the steam rising from every coffee cup and plate of food in the building. The parking lot was full, pickup trucks, sedans, and a row of motorcycles gleaming in the winter sunlight like chrome monuments. Glenda was working the counter with two new waitresses the owner had hired after the diner's sudden notoriety brought customers from 3 counties over. She moved with the same tired efficiency she'd always had, but something was different in her face. A lightness, maybe, or the absence of a heaviness she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. The occasion was the first annual fundraiser for missing and exploited children, organized by a coalition that included the Iron Veils, the county women's shelter, 2 churches whose names were not mentioned on the flyers, and a group of long-haul truckers who had started an informal network of reporting suspicious activity at rest stops along the I-44 corridor. Rooster had given a short speech earlier, 57 words. He'd counted. He said that the Iron Veils were not heroes, they were not role models, and they were not the solution to problems that the system should be solving. He said they were men who rode motorcycles and tried to be useful when usefulness was required. Then he sat down and ate a piece of pecan pie and refused to say anything else. Bishop stood by the door like a bouncer at the gates of something gentle, nodding at everyone who entered and frightening no one despite being the largest human being most of them had ever seen. Jenks was teaching a group of ranchers' kids how his prosthetic hand worked, letting them push the fingers open and closed while they shrieked with delight. Coyle and Brennan were arm wrestling at a corner table while a circle of truckers placed bets. Mason sat at the counter. Same stool, same spot. The exact place where he'd been sitting 3 months ago when a boy's note landed beside his boot. In front of him was a cup of black coffee. This time, it was warm. This time, he drank it. Eli appeared at his side. The boy climbed onto the next stool with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. And he had every Sunday for 12 weeks, sitting beside Mason while the world moved around them. He was wearing a denim vest that was 3 sizes too big for him. Nora had found it at a thrift store and sewn a patch onto the back. Not a club patch, not an Iron Veils insignia, but a simple embroidered design that Eli had drawn himself, a motorcycle beneath a single star. He looked ridiculous. He looked perfect. "You still scary?" Eli asked. Mason looked at him over the rim of his coffee cup. The boy's face had changed in 3 months. Not dramatically. Not the cinematic transformation of movies where damaged children suddenly glow with health and happiness. But the hollows under his eyes were less deep. The vigilance in his gaze had softened from constant to intermittent. He still checked exits when he entered rooms. He still flinched at loud sounds. He still slept with the door open and the light on. But he asked questions now. He made jokes. He laughed at Sergeant the Beagle. And every Sunday, he sat on this stool and asked Mason some version of the same question, not because he needed the answer, but because the ritual of asking and receiving had become a language between them, a call and response, a proof of continued existence. "To bad people," Mason said. Eli grinned, the same grin from the first time. Small, quick, real. Nora appeared behind them. She set a plate of pie between them, pecan, the kind Mason had left untouched that night, and rested her hand briefly on Eli's shoulder, a gesture that lasted less than a second but contained the entire weight of everything she couldn't say in public. "I'm here. You're here. We survived." She walked back to the booth where the foster parents were sitting with a group of neighbors, and the sound of her laughter, actual laughter, unguarded and unperformed, drifted across the diner like something warm entering a cold room. Mason picked up a fork. Eli picked up a fork. They ate the pie. Outside, the winter sun continued its slow descent toward the tree line, painting Ruby's Junction in shades of amber and rose. The motorcycles in the parking lot caught the light and threw it back in fragments, chrome and steel and the particular beauty of machines built for distance, ridden by men who understood that the road doesn't care where you've been, only that you keep moving. On the wall beside the register, Glenda had framed something, a piece of lined notebook paper. Pencil handwriting, slightly blurred where rain had touched it, the letters shaky but deliberate. Please don't let them take my sister tonight. Customers noticed it. Some read it and looked away. Some read it and wiped their eyes. Some asked Glenda about it, and she told them the story. Not the whole story, because the whole story belonged to the people who lived it, but enough. Enough for strangers to understand that this diner, this counter, this town had been the place where a child's courage met a stranger's broken heart, and something impossible happened. Mason finished his coffee, set the cup down, looked at the note on the wall. 3 months ago, he'd been a man running from a grave, riding nowhere, letting his coffee go cold because finishing it meant deciding to continue, and continuing had felt like the cruelest joke the world could tell. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't healed, wasn't fixed, wasn't redeemed in any way that a movie would recognize. Lily was still gone. The field outside Amarillo still existed, the tattoo on his arm still blurred with sweat and time, and the specific grief of a father who would carry his daughter's absence like a second skeleton for the rest of his life. But the coffee was warm, and the boy beside him was alive. And outside Ruby's Junction, the engines were rumbling. A sound that meant brothers, that meant road, that meant the particular kind of family that isn't born but built by men who chose each other in the dark and kept choosing each other every mile after. Eli finished his pie and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Can we ride before you go? Mason looked at him, at the ridiculous oversized vest, at the drawn-on patch, at the face of a 10-year-old boy who had walked into a diner during a thunderstorm with a note in his backpack and changed everything. Yeah, Mason said. We can ride. They walked outside together. The cold hit them immediately, sharp, clean, the kind of Missouri winter air that makes your lungs ache and your eyes water and reminds you that being alive is a physical experience, not an abstract one. Mason swung onto the Road King. Eli climbed on behind him, small arms wrapped around his waist. The same grip, the same trust, the same terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of a child, choosing to hold on to someone who might not deserve it, but shows up anyway. The engine kicked. The vibration moved through both of them. And Mason Creed, scarred, bleeding, imperfect, unfinished, pulled out of the parking lot of Ruby's Junction and rode west toward the setting sun with a boy on the back of his motorcycle, and the sound of a brotherhood rumbling behind them, and the cold winter air tasting like coffee and gasoline, and the raw, unsentimental, unbeautiful thing that happens when one stranger decides to look up from his cup before the moment passes. The road opened. The engine sang, and they rode.